Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Iron Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Secondary Bloodline Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. At 4:36 yesterday, the super-villain Holocaust was caught and contained by All Might, where he is now residing in Tartarus. After almost 300 deaths on Holocaust's hands, we are thankful that such a villain was taken. Midoriya Inko turned the TV off and pressed her hands to her face as if she could stop the tears before they even fell. She couldn't believe it. She actually couldn't believe it. After almost 10 years, Holocaust was finally caught, and she could live her life without the villain looming over her. Her and her 4-year-old son. She had met Hisashi in a bar, and if that wasn't stereotypical, then she didn't know what was. He had wooed her with his words, a dark charisma oozing from them as he promised her a night worthy to be remembered. After a good 10 minutes of him being persistent, she had finally relented, and he took her home, where she sure as hell had a night worthy to be remembered. She had been scared of it, fresh out of law school and aversion, never had any love experience, but the way Hisashi treated her, with patience and an almost loving ability to stop if she felt overwhelmed, she felt as if she could understand why women went through the initial pain. They had began dating, and after a good 3 years, they got married. Akatani Inko. That day had been the happiest of her life, but 2 years after the honeymoon, Hisashi started getting into shady shit. He began coming home at midnight in different clothes than he left in, leaving early in the mornings without saying goodbye, and she began to worry, because a new villain was on the loose, and she really didn't want to think about what Hisashi's disappearances and Holocaust's appearances could mean. Then she got PR gin and tea. She was so happy, a beautiful child with her lover of 5 years, husband of 2, and just as she had hoped, Hisashi was suddenly back in the picture. He was back to adoring Inko, showering her with gifts and love, caressing her stomach at night as he whispered how much he loved her, how grateful he was to have her, and she couldn't be happier. Until that love became something else. She wasn't allowed to leave the house, under any circumstances. She had found this out after Hisashi dragged her back home from the grocery store, steam pouring from his lips as he snarled at her, saying she couldn't leave with his child. She wasn't allowed to call anybody, or walk around the house, touch anything in the kitchen or living room, nothing. She was barricaded into their bedroom on bedrest, even though she was only 3 months PRGNT. One night, when she was pretending to be sleeping, she heard Hisashi slip into the house, and a sudden stench of blood and burnt flesh wafted into her room, and she gagged. There was something about the smell of burnt flesh that you could never have smelled it before, but be able to immediately identify it when you do. Tears sprang into her eyes the next morning when Hisashi was out, because last night, Holocaust had burned down an elder's hospital. There was no denying it anymore. Hisashi was Holocaust, the supervillain, mass murderer, and she was married to him. She was carrying his child. No, she wouldn't punish this child for something their father was, because she would raise this child to be different. She would raise this child to love the world, not hate it. And so, at 3 months PRGNT, she ran. She didn't take anything but her money, and she emptied the safe that Hisashi had for emergencies, trying not to cry when she had to move all the guns inside. She took her ring off, placed it in the safe, and ran. After being on the run for a good month or 2, she decided to move to Mizudafu and hoped to God her husband didn't follow her. Even though they had been legally married, it was far too easy to change her name back to Midoriya and say that her boyfriend did a runner. In her PRGSY, she met a lady by the name of Bakugou Katsuki, and they got along well. Mitsuki was like a raging fire, not in the way Hisashi was, but in a spitfire way, like she didn't have a problem saying what she thought, even if it hurt someone. She had liked the woman's bluntness, so different from the way Hisashi would twist his words and her feelings to get what he wanted. She was there for Bakugou Katsuki's birth, and she was named the auntie. 3 months later, Midoriya Inko gave birth to a perfectly healthy baby boy, who she named Midoriya Izuku. The little boy was the light of her life. He was always so happy, smiling like All Might and saying he'll become the #1 hero so Inko could be proud of him. She would do anything to protect him, she swore it. Mama, She quickly wiped her eyes and turned to her sunshine. He was rubbing his eyes blearily, the all-might onesie rumpled from his sleep as he stumbled over to her. She leaned down and pulled him into her lap. He slumped against her chest, body still warm and red lines pressed into his face from his pillow. "What is it, baby?" she asked, running a hand up and down his back. "Will I get your quirk?" She froze, and that small action prompted the small boy to look up at her, his eyes wide with childish innocence, something she wished he would have forever. "Mama? Of course you'll have my quirk," she said. "You'll be able to use telekinesis just like your mama." "What was Daddy's quirk?" Her grip on him instantly tightened, and he squirmed at the uncomfortable feeling. "Mama, we don't talk about your daddy, okay baby? Your daddy was not a good man." He blinked up at her and nodded slowly, intelligence shining in his large green eyes. "Okay mama. Can I play with Kaken today?" She hummed, pressing a finger to her chin and turning her head away, pretending to think about it as the impatient boy bounced in her lap. "Mama," he whined. Pretty please? Kachen found a secret base yesterday, and he wants to show me." "All right baby," she said, pressing a kiss to his cheek as she nuzzled into his neck, smiling at the way the boy squirmed and giggled. "Go get dressed and I'll give Mitsuki a ring." His eyes shined with excitement. "Okay mama. Thank you." He turned and dashed towards his room, and she chucked, before grabbing her phone and dialing her best friend. "Inko. What's up woman? Izuku wanted to play with Katsuki, so is he okay to pop by? He said Katsuki wanted to show him a secret base." "Of course. Tell the squirt that we'll be waiting for him." "Thank you Mitsuki." Yeah, I gotta go, Katsuki wants breakfast. We'll feed Izuku, so just send him over. I'll talk to you later bye." Mitsuki hung up before Inko could respond, and she chuckled. "Some things never change. I'm done mama. I'll see you later." Izuku called as he pulled the door open. She didn't even realize he came out of his room. "Be careful," she called, and heard him chime in agreement, before the door shut. She sighed and turned the TV back on, but the news on her husband was gone. She shook her head and decided to start making lunch, desperately trying to forget the quirk suppressants she had in her back pocket. "Kachen." The blonde boy turned around in time to be tackled by the smaller boy. He stumbled but quickly regained his footing. "Zuku!" he cried, wrapping his arms around his best friend and squeezing like they hadn't seen each other for years, instead of a day. "Are you ready to see my secret base?" "No leaving the property Katsuki," Mitsuki called through the window. Bakugou grumbled under his breath. "She says property like we have a big house." "Did you hear me brat?" "Yeah I heard you old hag," he yelled before his mother slammed the window shut. "You probably shouldn't call Auntie Mitsuki that, Kaken. It's not nice." Bakugou stuck his tongue out at the window. "Brat isn't nice either." He turned to his friend. "We'll sneak out later, but for now, want to play heroes and villains?" Midoriya nodded, and they began playing. They played the game for a long time, switching between hero and villain until the sun was high in the sky, and they had went in for breakfast and lunch. "All right," Bakugou said, pulling him into the backyard. "We've been playing for a long time, let's sneak out now." "I don't think this is a good idea," Midoriya said as they were sliding underneath a broken part of the fence. "Do you want to see the base or not?" Bakugou called, and that had Midoriya sliding all the way through the fence, and Bakugou was standing by the road with a red ball in his hand. He smirked when he saw Midoriya, and nodded towards the trail that would take them to a road leading towards the city, and past that road was a thicket of trees. "Come on, we don't got all day." Midoriya nodded determinedly, and Bakugou began leading the way up the trail. "How big is the base?" he asked, watching the way Bakugou bounced the ball. "Really big. I could make my explosions and you couldn't hear them from outside." "Really?" Midoriya said, his eyes getting wide in excitement. "Yeah, so hurry up and get your quirks so we can start training to be heroes," Bakugou said, holding out his hand and making a mini explosion. At the sudden explosion, the ball flew out of his hands and went rolling into the street. "Oops! I got it!" Bakugou called, running into the street and snatching up the ball. "Wait!" Midoriya cried, throwing his hand out to stop his friend. Don't. A horn honked and Bakugou whirled around, eyes blowing wide as he stared into the bright lights of an incoming car. Midoriya's instincts took over. He centered his weight as he threw his hands out, closing them over what looked like thin air as yanked his hands to his side, like he was pulling something away from someone. Instantly, Bakugou's body was jerked away from the street and flew in his direction. He shrieked as the boy collided into his chest, and they both fell backwards from the momentum. Midoriya fell hard onto his back as Bakugou landed on top of him, and the weight sent them both tumbling down the path, away from he road. They slid to a stop, their clothes torn and bloodied from scrapes, but both of them were alive. Midoriya sat up, ignoring the way his knees and arms screamed at him, sending tears into his eyes, and instead turned Bakugou onto his back. "Kaken, are you okay?" Midoriya cried, shaking Bakugou until red eyes opened and stared into his. "Kaken. Zuku, how did you?" Midoriya's eyes went wide. He looked to the ground beside Bakugou's head, and remembered the feeling. The instinct that had gripped him once he held his hands out, the way he felt Bakugou's weight as he jerked him away, the line pulling the other boy, snapping once he put his hands down. He looked down at his hands, in amazement. Though they were scratched and bleeding lightly, they had saved his best friend's life. He looked into Bakugou's dazed stare. "Did I think I got my quirk, Kaken?" Bakugou's eyes blew wide open, suddenly not that dazed anymore, and he sat up, excitement in his tone as he shook Midoriya's firm shoulders. "Do it again." Midoriya surveyed his surroundings, looking for something he could grab, and zeroed in on the ball that had almost taken his best friend's life. He held his hand out, and like before, he curled his fingers in and yanked his hand to the side. The ball lifted into the air once he held his hand out, and when he yanked it back, the ball came flying their way. Smacked Midoriya in the face, and he fell back with a cry. "Zuku!" Bakugou cried, leaning over his best friend to see a red mark rapidly darkening on his forehead. The boy was staring at the sky in shock, and Bakugou was about to get super worried, until the boy was sitting up, practically vibrating in excitement. "I got my mama's quirk, Kaken. We can start training to be heroes. Kaken, I can be a hero now." He shrieked in one breath, shaking Bakugou's shoulders as he began crying tears of happiness. "I have to test this out. I have to see my limits. I have to know how." Bakugou placed his hand over his best friend's mouth, and the boy essayed in a huge breath, the red tinge receding from his face. "Do you think you could pick me up again?" Midoriya's eyes twinkled in happiness, and he stepped back, putting a bit of space between them and bouncing on his heels as he stared into Bakugou's excited eyes. "Okay, Kaken. Don't move." He slid his legs to line up with his shoulders, centering his weight, and put both of his hands out, a weird feeling creeping into his hands at the stance. It felt like a cool water was slipping up his arms, caressing them and swirling around them in assurance that they would be able to carry the boy in front of him. He curled his fingers, and even though he couldn't see it, he could feel the cool substance slide through the air and curl around Bakugou's form. Bakugou didn't react at all, so it seemed like Midoriya was the only one who could feel it. He began slowly bringing his hands to his chest, and Bakugou's eyes blew wide open when his form lifted out of the air and began slowly floating towards the smaller boy. Bakugou laughed, and didn't stop laughing until Midoriya's quirk closed the distance between them and he was throwing his arms around the smaller boy, the cool substance swirling around Midoriya's entire form as if his excitement affected it. He gasped, "Kaken, I have to tell my mama." Bakugou instantly pulled away, his eyes bright, and he nodded frantically. He snatched Midoriya's hand and began dragging him away, Midoriya stumbling to catch up with his speed. "Come on!" Bakugou cried happily, tugging Midoriya harder. "We have to go. The sooner we can start training, the better." They both ran to Mitsuki's house, where she snatched Katsuki up at the sight of his injuries, and Midoriya waved goodbye, ignoring Mitsuki calling for him as he ran home. He cleared the stairs like they weren't even there, and threw open the door, the smell of soba wafting to his nose as he closed the door and chucked his shoes off. Mama, guess what?" Inko's head popped around the corner of the kitchen, and her eyes widened at the sight of Izuku's bruises and cuts. "Oh baby, what happened?" She cried as she hurried over to her son, kneeling down in front of him and checking his arms and legs. "Mama, guess what?" he said excitedly, before cupping Inko's face with his tiny hands and pulling it up to look into his eyes. "Mama, I got my quirk." Inko froze and her eyes widened. Izuku looked so happy, and she shakily stood up, grabbing his hand and pulling him towards the bathroom, where the first aid kit was. "Really, baby?" she said, forcing her voice to be steady. "What is it?" She sat Izuku on the counter, but before she could turn around to grab the kit, it was floating to her side, resting itself beside the proud boy as it opened itself. Band-aids and hydrogen peroxide flew out, hovering in front of her before she took them into her hands. "I got your quirk, Mama," the boy whispered as if it was a secret. Instantly, all of Inko's fears washed out of her and she cried out in happiness, crushing the smaller boy into her chest as he squeaked. She twirled them around a few times, before setting Izuku back onto the counter. "Okay, baby," she said excitedly. "How did it happen?" "Well, Kakin was taking me to see his secret base, but when he used his quirk, the ball fell out of his hands and rolled into the street. Inko did not like where this was going. He ran out to get it, even though I told him to wait. A big, scary car honked at him, and I pulled him away. We both fell down the road though, and that's why I have all these scratches, but Mama, I saved his life. I'm a hero now." She was frozen in shock, because Bakugou Mitsuki almost lost her child that day, and she hugged Izuku again, so very thankful that he didn't have to witness his friend's death. "That's right, baby," she whispered, rubbing his back. "You are Katsuki's hero now, and mine too." She began peppering the boy's cheeks with kisses, and he squealed and tried squirming away, laughing when Inko blew a raspberry on his cheek. "All right, baby," she said as she sat him down on the cough, band-aids over his arms and legs. "I am going to finish dinner, I just started it, so watch some TV until it's done, okay?" "Okay, Mama. Can I use my quirk?" Inko paused before beaming at her son. "Sure. Just don't overuse it too much, okay?" Izuku nodded excitedly, and he looked over at the remote, which floated over to him, hovering in front of his face, before the on button was pressed, and an All Might anime began playing. Instantly, Izuku began singing the opening extremely off-key, and the remote dropped to his side, resting peacefully as the boy bounced on the couch. Inko was a little jealous. Her baby had used it on Katsuki twice, the ball, first aid kit, and the remote, not looking even the littlest bit exhausted. Inko was tired if she pulled a pot to herself, but she guessed that's what quirks do? They get stronger the more generations they pass? Obviously that wasn't her case, but if her son was happy, then she would push the jealousy aside. She left into the kitchen and sighed when she felt the needle in her back pocket. It seemed like she wouldn't need it after all. As soon as she opened the trash can and threw the needle away, Izuku began feeling weird. He stopped bouncing and stared at the ground as a weird feeling slid into his chest. It felt like a snake was coiling around his lungs, tightening and tightening until he was struggling to suck air into his body. An uncomfortable feeling crawled under his skin, like a hot substance that had been dumped into his veins without his permission, and it simmered just under his skin, boiling and begging to be released. The cool substance that he had linked with his telekinesis was whipping around his body in a frenzy, and he could feel it double in size, now the length of 3 jumbo koi fish and sleek like a python. The uncomfortable feeling was welling up, and he was trying to push it down away, but the more he suppressed it, the stronger it wanted to come out. He finally decided he didn't want that feeling anymore, and he unscrewed the lid keeping it caged inside him. Fire instantly leaked out of his pores, growing in size by the second and bathing the entire room in a bright green glow. He screamed and threw himself off of the couch, stumbling away from the disintegrating couch, staring at his burning hands in shock, because he didn't feel the heat, and he didn't feel the uncomfortable feeling anymore. He felt free. He capped the lid inside his chest, and instantly his fire cut off, receding back into his body on command. He heard glass shatter, and he turned to see Inko staring at the couch in horror. "Mama, I'm sorry," he said, eyes wide in guilt. "It just came out. I didn't know I could use fire. I didn't mean to ruin the couch." She slowly turned around to stare at her son, the fire's green glow making her eyes shine unearthly in the shadows of her hair. "Do you want to be a villain, Izuku?" The boy flinched at the question, his eyes blowing wide as his mother began shaking. "No, Mama. I want to be a hero. I didn't mean to burn the couch, I'm sorry. Your father was Holocaust. And you have his quirk." Izuku felt all the happiness drain from his body, and it seemed like his world had stopped. A sick feeling gripped his stomach, and tears began spilling from his eyes. Not even the cool swirling of his quirk could calm him. His father was a villain? He was the son of the mass murder Holocaust? Inko was suddenly in front of him, her eyes wide with an emotion he couldn't place as she snatched his arms. "Izuku, baby, you don't want to be like your daddy, do you?" Midoriya Inko said, a crazed look in her eyes as she squeezed her crying son's arms. "You don't want to be a villain, do you?" "No, Mama," he cried, trying to pull away from his mother's painful grip. "I don't." "Good boy," she cooed, before pulling a needle out of her pocket. "Then don't move." "Mama, I'm sorry. I won't use it again. I promise." The little boy sobbed, thrashing futilely in his mother's arms, but Inko had already injected the substance into her son's veins. "That's right, baby, you'll never use it again," she said, staring at the couch that had been burned to ashes. "You'll never ever use it again." "What did you do?" Izuku screamed, yanking himself from his mother's grip as he collapsed to the floor, sobbing. He couldn't feel it anymore. The cool substance that was his quirk, or the warm feeling under his chest. It was like he was quirkless again, not able to feel what he had begun to love in those few seconds. Inko stood up, a faraway look in her eyes as she turned towards the kitchen. "You're sick, baby. Mama had to give you medicine." Izuku sobbed, and pushed himself to his shaky feet, following his mother into the kitchen. "Where is my quirk? What happened to it?" Inko paused, before she grabbed 2 bowls and placed them on the table. "What quirk, baby? You're quirkless." After that, Midoriya's happiness took a nosedive. Mitsuki had called the house to congratulate Izuku on his quirk, but Inko had acted confused, saying that Izuku didn't say anything about a quirk, and then Mitsuki was confused. Inko said that she would take Izuku to a quirk doctor, and then see what he said. Izuku wasn't stupid. He may be 4, but he was smart. His mother had pulled money from her bank account that morning, and when they went into the office, Dr. Tsubasa said he was quirkless, putting up an X-ray with a child's foot, and said foot had the extra toe joint. Inko had acted sad, and she held Izuku while he denied it, apologizing over and over again, and Dr. Tsubasa said he should give up on his dream of being a hero. "Oh, my poor baby," Inko had said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry." Izuku was too young to understand what the feelings were in his chest, but he would later learn that his mother was the first person to introduce him to bitterness and hatred. He and Bakugou split apart. It was ugly and unnecessary to Izuku, but the boy had been hurt and confused because he knew Izuku had a quirk, so he was always asking why Inko said he didn't. He had been shaking, suppressing his tears, but he had looked Bakugou in his eyes and told him he was crazy, because the doctors told him he was quirkless. Bakugou didn't take that well. For some reason he saw it as Midoriya looking down on him, that he wasn't worthy to see Midoriya grow and master his quirk, so he stopped being his friend. He started calling him a liar and a fake, an egotistical brat, shoving him around, stepping on him, using his quirk, as if he could force Midoriya's quirk out. Because his quirk could push past the suppressants. So Midoriya would lay there on the floor and cry, because Bakugou hating him for having a quirk he physically couldn't use hurt more than the burns on his back and arms. He would take the boy's anger and resentment silently, because his mother wouldn't do anything about it. Anytime he came home with burns, she would get this look in her eyes, and she would double the amount of suppressants in his system, as if his quirk was the one doing it. The only thing that made him feel better was the knowledge that his quirk was getting stronger. At first, when he was 4, Inko would only need to inject suppressants into his system every month, and his quirk wouldn't show up unless she missed the monthly mark. When he turned 10, it was weekly, because he had sent the couch, TV, dishes, table, and all their shoes into the ceiling, and Inko did not wait for the fire to spill out. He hated the suppressants. It felt like a cage in his chest, where his warm fire had once resided, and it kept that uncomfortable feeling under his skin. But as more of the years passed, it felt more like he was being burned alive by his own fire. He was wasting away, always in the burning agony, and that gave Inko the idea to tell everyone he was sick. He was sick, and he needed medicine every day, otherwise the outcome wouldn't be pretty. Every night, he would lay in bed and thrash against the cage with all his might. He would scream, claw at it, throw his body into it, and every day, it seemed to weaken. It would weaken and weaken, on the verge of breaking, and then Inko would replenish the suppressants, and it was back to being the unbreakable titanium cage that held his joy. Sometimes, he wondered why he even bothered trying anymore. He wasn't living, he wasn't even surviving. He was in a painful, monotonous loop, and he wanted it to be done. Wake up, shower, dress himself for school, Inko would give him the suppressants with breakfast, she would kiss him goodbye, and he would trudge his way to school, every movement setting his nerves on fire, his body aching at the toxic substance that was always in his system. His cheeks were sunken in, and his skin was stretched taut over his bones, his eyes always seemed to have a dead look to them, as if he has seen the world before his time. His eye bags were almost black due to his nights staying up trying to break the cage inside his chest. Overall, he looked like he just rose from the grave. He was scarred too. The inside of his elbows had nasty needle scars from when he was younger, and Inko would frantically stab the needle into his arm to stop his fire. But soon enough, his veins were forever poisoned, the toxic substance infecting his red blood cells and turning them a horrible dark purple color. Remember when he said he felt the cage resting inside his chest? Yeah, there were black lines spiderwebbing his veins around the middle of his chest, and it showed in his back as well. The entirety was surrounded by black and purple bruising, which overall looked like his back and chest was decaying, which it technically was. The black lines, the poison veins were the only reason Inko stopped injecting the suppressants, so she wouldn't kill her son. Sometimes, when the agony of burning and aching was too much, and all he could do was lay there, empty, his body too broken to cry, he wished she would just kill him. That was what Inko said his sickness was. Apparently, his black veins were poisoned down to the very tissue, turning them that black color, so any time new blood vessels ran through them, they would turn the horrible purple color. No one but he, Dr. Tsubasa, and Inko had seen them. Anytime he had to change in public, he would go into the bathroom, and if that made him late in PE, then that's what it did. He would rather his PE grades suffer than sit in the nurse's office because someone saw his bruised spiderwebbing black veins and thought he was dying. Which he was, but no one needed to know that. Despite all this, he wanted to be a hero. He wanted to help people like him, who were threatened at the very thought of living, of being themselves. People who were shoved into a cage and locked in the dark, where people screamed at them and called them names. People who just wanted it all to end because the pain was just too much. Izuku, baby, it's time to get up. Work called me in early, so your medicine is in your breakfast. I'll see you later, don't be late. He opened his eyes in time to see his mother lean in and press a kiss to his cheek. She stood up, motioned for him to get ready, and slipped out of his room, and only when he heard the front door close did he pull himself to his feet. His bones ached, his joints throbbed, and his head pounded at every movement, but he was used to it. He went through this every day, and it was painful. He sluggishly got ready, and as he pulled his shoes on, he stared at the onigiri sitting harmlessly on the table. Inko usually put his medicine into his drinks, and made sure he drank all of it, but today it seemed like she just put it into the rice ball. He stood up and walked over to the table, picking up the food and inspecting it, before ripping it open to check the middle. There was a capsule in the middle of it, and it was filled with the mercury-looking substance. He stared at it, such a small thing that could hurt him so much, and plucked it out of the heart of rice. He made his way to the sink and turned the water on, stunned at what he was about to do. He dropped the capsule, and it went straight down the drain, just like his happiness when Inko first made him quirkless. He turned the water off, before turning around and making his way to the front door, nibbling on the rice, and determining it didn't have the metallic taste of his medicine. He devoured the entire rice ball, his first taste of something not laced with suppressants since. He was 4 and marveled at the plain flavor of rice. As he made his way to the school, he saw Bakugou swaggering onto the premises and got ready for another hellish day. Honestly, you'd think that after how many years, they would get tired of using the same, worthless, quirkless Deku. Midoriya has had 10 years to steel his nerves against everyone's hatred, and since they weren't getting creative with their insults, he had nothing to worry about. He had no one to hold his hand and help him up, no one to fall into, and no one who cared about him, so why should he care about what they were saying to him? Midoriya Inko said she loves her son, but her protecting him from his own quirk was killing him. Dr. Tsubasa had said so. He had said that to her face, that she was killing her own child painfully slow, and she told him he didn't know what he was talking about, and they never went back to that clinic. He wished that doctor had called the cops because he just wanted it all to be over. Inko stopped looking at him, as if the sight of him physically pained her. Hoopty fng do, just being him hurt. The older he got, the more and more his hair looked like his father's. That was it. Inko hated his hair, because it reminded her of her husband's. She never let him cut it though, because his father's hair was cut close to his scalp. Even when he was young, she would never touch it. Never brush it, card her fingers through it, pat his head, nothing. It was always his back or shoulders and… The bell rang and he was startled out of his shell. It was funny how when you lock someone up in any way, they will be locked up in every other aspect. His peers began gathering his stuff, and he was following suit, taking much longer than usual due to a weird feeling in his chest. It felt like something was breaking. He drew in a breath and pressed both hands to his chest, marveling in the way he could feel the cage being destroyed, broken off bit by bit as his quirk thrashed against it. An explosion knocked him out of his marveling, and he dropped his hands up from the hand on his desk and met angry red eyes. "You wanna go to UE, UFING quirkless sheet?" Bakugou yelled, another explosion making sure Midoriya would have to do his homework again. "You think you're better than me?" Midoriya just stared at him, because it was breaking. The stupid FNG cage that had been with him forever was breaking, and he couldn't bring himself to care over what the stupid boy in front of him was saying. His silence just angered the blonde more, and his collar was snatched, Bakugou yanking him out of his seat and away from his desk. Bakugou shoved him backwards and his stupid minion stuck his foot out, and Midoriya met the floor hard. His arms were aching, his chest, legs and bottom was throbbing, but he didn't care. It was breaking. If you wanted a quirk so FING badly, you should take a swan dive off the roof of the building and pray for a quirk in your next life. Midoriya wasn't listening. A cool feeling was sliding up his arms, like he had dove into the pool on an extremely hot day, but instead of feeling cold, a warm feeling was spreading through his chest, into his arms and legs, and that juxtaposition completely got rid of the empty feeling. His body wasn't aching and he didn't feel like taking a bullet through the head anymore. He felt the most rested he had since he had been put onto those suppressants, and he felt like he could run 1,000,000 miles without ever tiring. This is what his mother had taken from him? He realized Bakugou said something to him, but he was off in space, so he stood up in another world and began gathering his things. "Sure, thank you Bakugou, you're really smart," he said distractedly, shouldering his backpack and making his way to the door, not seeing the way the three boys looked at each other in horror. His shoulder was grabbed, and one of the boys began saying something, but Midoriya was up to his eyes in irritation. He whirled around and unbeknownst to him, his eyes shone a toxic green, making the boys stumble away, staring at him with shocked. "Leave me alone," he hissed, the sound of flames licking at his mouth making his words come out distorted and harsh, like he wasn't from this world. He turned around and slid the door open, ready to leave. It smashed against the wall with much more force than he knew he had, the wall cracking and splintering off like he had taken a baseball bat to plaster. He shut the door behind him, the same thing happening to the other wall, but he ignored it, quickly making his way out of the school where he could get some rest. As he was speed walking, he was lost in his thought, and he didn't see the boy in front of him until it was too late, and they were both sprawled on the floor. Midoriya sat up and opened his mouth to apologize, before freezing at the sight of the boy's eyes. They were two different colors, but they held the same look as Midoriya's own. The look of being caged somewhere you could never hope to escape, the cold look of someone who cut themselves off from all outside things to stop themselves from being hurt. He held his hand out, and the boy's eyes widened the smallest amount. He had recognized the look in Midoriya's eyes as well. He took the boy's outstretched hand and Midoriya pulled him up with the strength he didn't know he had. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice sounding just as emotionless as before, like he was so done with the world that he couldn't hope for it all to end. Which he did, but the feeling in his chest was eating away at that hopelessness. "I wasn't paying attention to where I was going." The boy nodded slowly, and Midoriya moved to walk around him, but the boy caught his arm, and Midoriya tensed, the cool feeling swirling around him faster, like it was affected by his emotions. The boy slowly turns to look him in the eyes, and again, it was like looking into the mirror. "What happened to you?" he asked, and if that's what he sounded like, cold and unrelenting, he hoped he sounded just as badass, and not like he had been drinking a toxic substance. "That's a story," Midoriya hummed, his voice still monotone. It was something he could never shake. Ever since he lost his quirk, he had lost the ability to show his emotions. "I doubt you would be willing to sit by me when it's done, son of Endeavor." The boy flinched at the reminder, and Midoriya felt bad, because this boy could never escape the shadow his father cast. Midoriya had hope, because his father was imprisoned, and his fire was different from Holocaust's. Holocaust only breathed fire, and even then it was a dark, dark green bordering black, while Midoriya's fire came out of his pores, and they were a pale, pale green, almost white. "If I share my story, you're sharing yours," Midoriya said, and the boy stared at him, before nodding. 10 minutes later, they were sitting in a secluded cubicle in a little shop that the boy had gotten using his father's credit card. "And your father doesn't know you're using it?" he asked, a little shocked when the boy shook his head. "He has too many to count, so if one goes missing he'll assume it's in the house somewhere and get another one." Midoriya nodded, and once they had their drinks, he took a sip of his large Mountain Dew. "I can summarize why I'm like this in one sentence, or I can give you the long story. Which one do you want?" The boy paused before saying, "Let's start with the sentence. I'm Holocaust's son." The boy spit out his soda, and it sprayed all over the table as he scrambled to grab a napkin. Midoriya calmly took a sip of his own drink, and the boy nodded. "Yeah, that makes sense." Midoriya looked over at him. "You have 2 quirks, just like me." Instantly, the boy's face steeled over, and he was glaring at the table, his hands clenching in anger. "That I don't use my father's quirk. Ever." Midoriya froze. "Because it's his quirk, and I don't want anything that BSTRD gave me. He broke my mother, and that's why I have this burn scar. She saw my face and thought it was his. I hate him. I hate him so much, and so I'll never use his fire." Midoriya's eyes glazed over, but the boy didn't notice. "It's his fire, and I don't want anything to do." "Stop. Stop it before I break your nose," Midoriya said, and the boy looked up, startled. Midoriya looked into his 2 colored eyes, and allowed his anger to show. "That is your quirk." "No, it isn't." He immediately denied, but quickly shut up when Midoriya's glass cracked from the strength he was squeezing it. "That fire quirk is yours. It responds to your command, does it not?" The boy sat back, as if that had never crossed his mind. Midoriya scoffed. "I don't know why I'm trying to change your mind. You're just like my mother. No matter how much I tell her that this quirk is mine, she doesn't believe it. She sees my flames and sees my father, and you are so lucky you can even use your quirks." The boy furrowed his eyebrows. "What?" Midoriya unclenched his hand, liquid spilling out onto the table, and started unbuttoning his bottom shirt. He had taken off the black top earlier, and had been sitting in his white undershirt. "What are you?" The boy cut himself off, eyes blowing wide as he hissed in a breath at the sight of the black, bruised spiderweb on Midoriya's chest. "Do you know what this is, Todoroki Shudo?" Midoriya asked, his voice shaky with the suppressed emotions. The boy didn't answer, or question how he knew his name. He just stared at the horrible black veins that sat in Midoriya's chest. "This," he pointed at his chest as if the boy hadn't seen it, "is what happens when your mother has been injecting quirk suppressants into your veins since you were 4. Todoroki's head snapped up, his eyes wide in shock and horror. The worst thing you could do to a child was put them on suppressants. A child's largest milestone was getting their quirk and growing with it. Something with the responsibility of their quirk triggered their brain that allowed them to continue to grow and learn emotion-wise. To suppress a child's largest milestone was psychotic, like never teaching your child to talk. "Oh my God," he whispered, and it was the most emotion he had ever heard in the boy's voice. "You can't use your quirk." Midoriya let go of his shirt and shook his head. "I didn't take it this morning, so I can feel it coming back to me. I just need to use it." "How many times are you taking that?" Todoroki asked, still in shock. His father may be in but giving your child quirk suppressants was the worst form of abuse, more so than neglect and physical abuse combined. Midoriya shifted and grabbed a bunch of napkins to wipe up his drink that was now on the table and shrugged. "I was first injected on the day I manifested my quirk, and I was getting new doses every month. Before I turned 10 and it was every week. Only recently did it become every day." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Midoriya looked him in the eyes. "Why haven't you told anyone your father's physically abusive?" Todoroki scoffed and crossed his arms. "No one would believe me." Midoriya nodded when Todoroki trailed off, and he could do nothing but stare. "We have shitty home lives." Todoroki breathed, and Midoriya huffed a breath through his nose, the closest he had been to laughing since he was 6. Midoriya pulled out his phone and motioned for Todoroki to hand his over. They swapped phones and numbers, Todoroki still shell-shocked as Midoriya bade him goodbye and left. Todoroki sat there for a while, staring at the table in shock, before a small smile grew on his lips. "He left me with the check." As Midoriya was on his way home, marveling at his lack of short breathlessness, he heard a loud explosion and looked ahead to see a group of people crowding around an alleyway. His interest piped. He made his way to the alleyway, squeezing through the crowd until he was standing in the front, next to a gangly blonde man in white. "Oh my God," he whispered. It was a villain attack all right, but it was Bakugou being held captive. The boy was screaming into the green sludge, thrashing and clawing to try and escape, desperation and fear written into his eyes, and Midoriya was moving before he even realized it. Bakugou had looked exactly how he felt for the past 10 years of his life, and he would be dead before he let anyone, even Bakugou Katsuki, feel that way. He heard a few people call out at him to stop, but he was already running and he tossed his backpack at the villain, a corner of it smashing into his eye. The villain screeched in pain, and his hold on Bakugou slipped, enough for the boy to succumb in a giant gulp of air. Midoriya was running, his weight wasn't centered, but the cool substance that he seemed to be the only one to feel swirled around his arms, telling him that they would be able to carry the boy's weight. He was struck by a sudden bout of déjà vu, but he couldn't remember where this could have happened before. He locked eyes with Bakugou just as he threw his hands out, and instinct curled his fingers in as he yanked. Bakugou tore out of the sludge as if it was tissue paper. The larger boy collided with Midoriya's chest, and they both fell back, Midoriya instantly springing to his feet with energy he had never felt before. He snatched Bakugou's collar, ready to launch him away, but the villain was shrieking, and he was suddenly encased in the sludge. Now, when someone is being suffocated with sludge being forced down their throats, the normal thing to do is panic and think, "Holy FNG shit, I'm going to die, I don't want to die." Midoriya did not panic. Instead, he felt a weird emotion, a boiling, burning emotion that simmered deep under his skin, slowly rising to the surface. Because this villain, this man wanted to suffocate him. He wanted to shove him into a box and cut his airflow off, just like his mother had done to his quirk, and the feeling grew, bubbling and ready to explode. Midoriya barely uncapped the lid in his chest, instinctively letting go, and he felt flames burst from his body. That lid in his chest was opened about a millimeter, and still his flames roared out of his body and over the sludge villain, the color illuminating the villain but otherwise hid by Bakugou's fire. He was so thankful that the reporters were so far away, or else they would have caught the way his pale flames danced along the villain's form, as said villain screamed and thrashed, trying to hold on to the boy, before realizing that it was said boy who was harming him. As the villain was thrashing, he felt his flames dim as more sludge spilled over his head, and he felt that ugly feeling again. "I just got these back and you want to take them away?" He screamed, and his eyes shone green as smoke curled from his lips. He threw his head back and snarled, aiming his fire around his back, straight into the villain. The scream of pain the villain made was the only sound the cameras caught from the attack. The villain spit Midoriya out, calling him a monster, a villain, but Midoriya didn't bother to ask how he recognized his flames. Instead, he jerked away and snatched Bakugou's shirt, the boy staring at him with a shocked expression, and he ran towards the crowd. Everyone was staring at him incredulously as he deposited Bakugou on the ground, wiped imaginary dust off, and took off, ignoring the heroes calling out for him to come back. He slowed his pace after a good 5 minutes of sprinting before he froze upon passing a mirror shop. He turned to look into one of the mirrors and gently touched his face in awe. In the measly hour he has had his quirk back, his skin was somehow smoothing out, no longer looking taut, and it looked brighter, already healing itself. He turned around and cursed. The back of his shirt was burned off, and his ugly, bruised black spiderweb was free for the entire world to see. He decided he would take the alleyways to hide his scarring, and he pulled his shirt off and twisted it around so it would cover his back. He could cross his arms and cover his chest, so he wasn't worried. He slipped into an alley and began walking, jumping over trash and abandoned crates, suspicious liquid puddles, and things he really didn't want to think about. He made it home in record time and was thankful to see that his mother was still out. Hopefully, since they called her in early, they would keep her in late. He shuffled out of his shoes and made his way into his room, dropping his phone on the nightstand as he snatched new clothing and made his way to the bathroom. He had left his backpack, but he wasn't worried about it. After a long shower to rid of the smell of sewage, he experimented with his quirk, like the water temperature, the shampoo and body wash, etc. He could pick up the bottle, open it, and pour some onto his head, but when he tried scrubbing it into his scalp, it just didn't work. It was as if his cool substance didn't understand it, so maybe it had to be taught. After he stepped out of the bathroom, finding out he could also dress himself with his quirk, he decided that he was going to find out everything about his quirks, and when his mother came home. He sighed as he sat on his bed, closing his curtains but opening the window so the smoke could air out without setting off the fire alarm. He looked down at his chest and glared at his black veins that were visible through his white shirt. His mother always made him wear white, as if she was assuring herself that Midoriya was still sick. He could either tell his mother that her medicine was actually killing him and she needed to stop giving it to him, or he could pretend like he was still taking it and slowly become stronger behind her back. Oh wait, she knows it's killing him. Pretending to take it was too risky. She could just continue putting it into his drinks instead of capsules in his food, and then he would really be screwed. He slowly uncapped the lid, letting just a sliver of that warmth into his chest, and forced it down into his palm, where a pale green flame the size of a basketball burst to life. His eyes widened in childish glee, and he made the fire twist and twirl like a ballerina, slowly dancing its way across his hand. He felt the cool substance slide around his arm, slowly curling around it until it was settled right beside the flame, as if it was curious about it. He had an idea, and the cool substance wrapped around the green flame as it took shape of a phoenix, floating off of his hand and into the room, mimicking a flying bird. He grinned and held his hand out, this time creating a fiery koi fish that swam over his palm, wondering how he could get it onto the cool substance, and right at the thought, his invisible line split into two, the second one twirling around his koi fish and carrying it away, where his room became its pond. Tears welling up in his eyes, he began creating animal after animal, his telekinesis splitting in half to carry them and bring them to life, until he had over 100 animals walking, crawling, swimming and flying around his room, brightening his room with the green glow of his flame. He wiped his eyes, and an idea popped into his head. He could make animals, and they could appear as if they were alive, so what was stopping him from trying to create a human? He looked at his hand, and wiped his eyes again, before holding it out and opening his lid a centimeter, sending a huge amount of flame into his hands, and it curled around his arm. He began thinking, and the first person who came to mind was the Todoroki boy he met earlier. He curled his flame, twisting it and allowing it to grow as he closed his eyes, picturing the boy who had had the same dead look in his eyes. Only once his fire stopped morphing, and it just sat in front of his palm, did he open his eyes, and his jaw dropped at what was in front of him. It was him, It was the FING boy. His dual-toned hair and eyes, tan complexion, lithe form, the black hoodie and blue jeans he was wearing earlier. The boy was standing and he looked so FANG real that Midoriya squealed and fell backwards, but the boy didn't move. What the F dash? He breathed and his mind was absolutely blown. He had made that. His fire had made that. He froze, and tears spilled out of his eyes as he sobbed, pressing a hand to his mouth. His mother was wrong. His mother was so FANG wrong. She made him quirkless because she was afraid his quirk would be exactly like his father's, in the way that it would take and consume everything, leaving nothing but pain and despair behind. But this was his quirk. It followed his command, and his quirk created. It created whatever he wanted, created the feeling of happiness and left the feeling of elation. He sobbed into his hands, because his mother, someone who was supposed to love and cherish him, had taken this away from him. She had begun killing him to keep this feeling in his chest. She would rather he die than feel this immense joy. He felt a hand on his shoulder, and he jolted, looking up into the dual-colored eyes of Todoroki Shudo. His jaw dropped as the boy crouched in front of him, his hand feeling very real, and opened his mouth to speak. "It will be okay," he said, his voice the same monotone as in the shop, smooth like water but so dead. He felt more tears well up, because the boy wasn't here. This wasn't the real Todoroki, so that meant his own quirk was comforting him, telling him that they would get through this together. He looked up and saw all of his creations, all of his animals swirling above his head, as if they were forming a wreath of fiery happiness. He sat like that, and cried into his hands until the sky was darkening, and he could smell the petrichor in the air. He sniffed and wiped his eyes, smiling at the boy sitting in front of him. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotions. His quirk nodded and smiled. If that's how the real Todoroki Shudo looks when he smiles, Midoriya swears right then and there that he would make that boy smile forever. "Your mother is here," he whispered, and Midoriya jolted when he heard a car pull into the parking spot. Instantly, his creations, including the boy in front of him, seemed to curl into themselves, their light dimming as they began swirling around his chest, merging into one large strand of fire until it sunk into his glowing skin, and slid back into the container he had in his chest. He took a deep breath and pressed a hand to his chest, feeling a warm pulsing underneath his palm that brought a smile on his lips, before holding out his hand. Instantly, his invisible line curled around onto arm, before sinking into it like the fire, only it left a tattoo behind. It was a beautiful, blue and white and swirling around his arm, shining like a ribbon in the light. He quickly grabbed a thin sweater and slipped it over his arms, feeling sad at having to cover something so beautiful. After a moment of thinking, he snatched his wallet, in case he had to run. It had a good amount of money in there from reliable sources. His phone was traceable. "Izuku? Baby, where are you?" He heard his mother say, and he pulled himself to his feet, and made his way to the door. He was going to confront her. She had locked up his happiness, his love and joy deep in his chest, and he wasn't okay with that. She may be his mother, but hell if he sits there and allows her to kill him. He slipped into the living room, and his mother was slipping her shoes off, placing her purse on the table. She turned around and opened her mouth to say something, before freezing at the sight of his face. "What's the matter?" He wanted to snarl, the emotion identified as anger up creeping into his chest. Never seen a healthy kid before? She dropped her sweater and took a shaky step forwards, her hands lifting to press against his cheeks, but he curled his lip back and hissed. Her eyes went wide and she stumbled back, horror slipping onto her face. "Izuku," she whispered, pressing her hands to her mouth. "What did you do?" Midoriya squared his shoulders and took a deep breath, before sliding his thin sweater off his shoulders, and her eyes zeroed into the blue lines curling on his arms. "Are those tattoos?" She shrieked, walking forwards and snatching his arms, before freezing when she saw the way they shone, glinting in the light like a knife. Her eyes slowly slid up to his face, searching his eyes, and he could tell the minute his anger spilled into them, because her face lost all of its color. His eyes were glowing the toxic green. "Izuku, you didn't take your medicine," she cried, before whipping around and darting to her purse, rummaging through it frantically. "Oh my baby, you could die. You're killing me, Mom," he snarled, and she froze at the tone, slowly turning to face him. "But you knew that, didn't you? You know you're killing me, you just don't care." Anger was curling in his chest, something he hasn't felt before. On those horrible suppressants, he felt nothing but emptiness, nothing but the burning agony that took his entire being and racked it with pain. He has never felt these emotions before, the way they ate at each other, switching and twirling around each other like the fire that danced through his poison veins. Disbelief spilled onto Inko's face. "Excuse me? You heard me." Fire was licking at his throat, and Inko flinched when smoke began curling past his lips. "You don't care about me. You only care about yourself, and that's why you're killing me, so you can erase your mistakes. Shut up." Inko screamed, and Midoriya flinched when a window cracked. "I'm your mother. You will treat me with respect." Midoriya glared at her, and maybe a small part of him was screaming, because he was effing calling his mother out on her sheet, but the bigger part of him was being consumed by flames, his flames. "Respect? Respect? You've been poisoning me since I was 4. He screamed, and his head snapped back with the blow, his back slamming into the wall. Blood dampened his flames as he doubled over to cough the liquid out. He straightened up and wiped his mouth, turning to look at his mother in shock. She didn't just hit him, she used her quirk on him. She slapped him and threw him into the wall. She was staring at him, a crazed look in her eyes as she stepped forwards, and Midoriya felt fear creep up his back as the needle glinted in her hand. Why did she always seem to have one of those on her? "You're sick, Izuku," she said, her voice empty, not all there. "Mama has to give you medicine." Fear gripped at his core, because that sent him into déjà vu, and not the good kind. He may not remember where he heard his mother say that before, but he knew the outcome of it wasn't pretty. She launched herself at him, and he tried to scramble away, but his back hit the wall, and this was his mother. He could go to jail for hurting her. The needle jabbed into his skin, and he lost all care of hurting her. His entire invisible line, thick as an old tree and as long as a blue whale, burst from his skin, wrapping around Inko like a python and tossing her across the room. She smashed into the cabinet holding all of her precious ceramics, and collapsed to the floor, rolling onto her back with a groan. He was panting, not from quirk exhaustion but from adrenaline. He just did that. That was the first time he had ever fought back, and damn it felt good. His quirk was twirling around him protectively, an invisible barrier that promised him safety as Inko climbed back to her feet. He felt anger clutch at his chest as she gave him a look of betrayal, as if she couldn't believe he would ever hurt her. "Izuku, why? How could you hurt me? You're hurting me!" He screamed, tears spilling from his eyes as his fire bubbled just underneath his skin. "You're killing me, and you want me to sit back and take it?" Inko stood and held up her hands like she was trying to calm him down, a look of disappointment on her face and in her tone. "See, Izuku? This is why you're on medication. As soon as you stop taking it, you lose control, and you hurt the people you love. Do you really want to be like your father?" Midoriya's eyes blew wide open, and he could not put into words how angry he was. Maybe if he understood his emotions better, he would have realized it was rage and hatred, mixing and whipping around in his chest. That was the breaking point of Midoriya Izuku. His jaw was clenched as his teeth ground together, holding back the flames that wanted to punish, his rational thinking blinded by the 5-star course of hatred, and his skin began glowing slightly, the fire rising to the surface, ready to come out. Q. Inko gasped in shock, and she took a step back, her features quickly morphing into anger, but before she could reprimand him, Midoriya's anger seemed to just jump out of his chest. "F you!" he screamed, his eyes glowing his toxic green as smoke curled off of his figure. You motherfucking bitch. I effing hate you. I hope you effing rot in hell. F you. He turned and ran, straight into his room as he slammed the door shut, heart racing when he heard the wall splinter and break from the force, but he didn't care. His quirk was swirling around him, the force of it making cracks appear on the wall as he tried to bury the urge to run back in there and show her how much he hated her. His bed was thrown into the wall along with his desk, but he ignored it and ran towards his window. He threw open the window, the glass sizzling and immediately melting at his touch, the rest fogging up from his steam meeting the rain. He looked down at the ground, and his quirk buzzed happily, telling him that it would catch him. He heard his mother begin stomping to his room, as if she could intimidate him, and he yanked himself onto the sill, the wood heating up and burning at his touch, leaving nice handprint scorch marks on the white paint. He slid his legs out of the window and took a deep breath. The door slammed open behind him, and his mother shrieked, "Izuku!" But he launched himself away from his room, the rain sizzling and evaporating before it even touched him, leaving him completely dry as he began falling. His fire burst from his chest, and he heard his mother scream, before it swirled around his hips, growing larger and larger in size like a portal as it swirled faster and faster, and he realized he was floating. He let himself think, "What the F?" before his fire slowed its spinning, and he was lowered to the ground gently. He stood there in shock, before he shook his head and bolted, running away from his mother, away from the suppressants, away from everything. Maybe if he ran fast enough, he could escape the lies and pain. He was sitting on the edge of the roof when Aizawa first met him. The small boy with the villain's web, steam curling off of his slumped figure as he stared down at all of the traffic below him. Most people don't know about the villain's web, because it's not a practice done with normal children. The only people who know about the villain's web are heroes, medical staff, policemen, and influential families. The government doesn't tell normal people in hopes that the practice won't be picked up anymore. The villain's web is a poisoning children get when their parents inject them with quirk suppressants to try and stop them from gaining their villain parents' quirk. It's usually located around the heart area, and the first sign that a child has the web is their inability to show emotions. Most people write that off as a phase, so the second stage is more noticeable. In the second stage, purple bruising will appear on the chest, sometimes even on the back, and this is from the toxin poisoning the skin. The third sign will be the darkening of said bruise, until it's black, and this is usually when people start noticing. The fourth sign is the worst, and most children usually die a few years after they hit this stage, so it's dubbed the last stage. The child's veins will become poisoned, therefore poisoning their blood, and the only way to get rid of the poisoning is to remove the veins, or to allow the body to heal itself without any more injections. Not a very pretty thing to do to a child. Unfortunately, most black markets and underground sellers sell amounts of liquidized quirk suppressants for this one reason. Most adults that need suppressants have to put down their names, and the villain whose child they're going to suppress, so that if they ever double-cross the seller, they'll turn them into the police for villain webbing a minor. Aizawa had been doing a normal patrol, before it had begun raining, and with the most irritation a 30-year-old mad could manage, which was a lot, he had climbed down from his precious perch above all of the buildings in search of one closer to the ground. As he was jumping from building to building, he had spotted a teenager sitting on the edge of a roof, and he had gotten himself ready to stop another suicide attempt. But that didn't happen. The boy just sat there and stared at everything below him, steam curling off of him as if he was burning. Aizawa had been exasperated, and jumped from his building to the back of the kids, ready to send home another runaway. Teenagers really needed to chill it with the angst, because he couldn't keep doing this. Then he had seen the boy's back. Dread and fear gripped his spine, because this angsty teenager who he had been getting ready to send home was in the final stage of the villain's web, meaning he was on the verge of death. "Hey kid," he said, and the boy whipped around, blinking in shock before he launched himself to his feet. "Eraserhead!" he cried, tossing his hands out, and Aizawa allowed himself to feel shock. "I'm not a villain. Or a criminal. I swear. Oh my God, please don't send me home." "Shush," he said, walking forwards and sitting down by the ledge, crossing his legs but not leaning them over the edge like the kid had done earlier. "Sit." The boy paused but complied, and Aizawa marveled at the way he moved easily. Most kids in the final stage said that every movement hurt them, their bodies feeling like brittle twigs, seconds away from breaking. "So, which villain are you the kid of?" The boy violently flinched and lurched backwards, fear on his face, and Aizawa realized he could have asked that question much better. I don't know what you're talking about," the boy said, and Aizawa shook his head. "Even the kids of..." The smallest villains out there can have the villain's web, so he couldn't go through a mental list. Aizawa sighed. You have the villain's web, that means you've been on quirk suppressants for a long time, especially since you're in the last stage. The boy looked shocked, and Aizawa trained his eyes towards the incoming cars, ignoring the boy's shaking. Why you know what this is? The boy breathed, and he sounded so fragile that Aizawa felt anger rush through his system. He had never dealt with a child suffering from the villain's web, but he had heard stories about it. His peers had talked about it, about how you didn't even know the kid, and you could hate their villain parent, but the moment they realized you could help them, they sounded too fragile, and it did things to you. Aizawa hadn't believed it, because he didn't know the child, like they said, so why would he feel anything for them? His peers had patted him on the shoulder, and told him he would see if he ever had to deal with it. Now he understood. It's a horribly common practice amongst parents of a villain's child. Whether it's to keep the child safe, by making sure they never get their parents' quirk, or by malicious intent to make sure the kid never gets a quirk, it's only done with villain children. Aizawa looked over to the boy, and his normally unfeeling heart clenched in pain when he saw the way the boy was staring at him. He looked as if Aizawa told him he could save him from death. Boy. So, the boy's voice broke. Why you can help me? Aizawa nodded, and cringed away when the boy started bawling. He didn't do emotions, and from the looks of it, neither should this kid. It hit him over the head, and he felt like an idiot. Obviously, this kid was in the final stage of the villain's web, and if he was a runaway, it meant he had somehow gotten his parent to not give him the injection, and they didn't take that well. Please, the boy sobbed. Don't let her take me, please. His villain parent is male. Aizawa nodded, and the boy curled into himself, shaking as he silently sobbed into his hands. Aizawa allowed the boy to cry, and when he was done, the boy sniffed once, before was laughing, worrying the pro-hero just a bit. I'm sorry, the boy said, wiping his eyes as he smiled, before pressing a hand to his chest, right in the middle of the scarring. I love these feelings in my chest, even if most people don't consider them good. How long have you been off? Aizawa asked because from the sound of it, this boy was fresh. Just today. Yep, this boy was fresh off of the suppressants, so he didn't exactly have a good hold over his emotions. That also meant he was extremely quick to snap or cry, so he probably blew up on his mother, all of those years of anger building up and being pressed onto his shoulders in a single second. He really hoped he didn't have to deal with a villain's web child who accidentally killed their parent because they couldn't control the hatred in their chests. Your mother, Aizawa began, and the boy looked up at him, a little confused. You didn't kill her, right? The boy flinched, and again, Aizawa realized he could have said that much better. I mean, he said, cutting off the boy before he could begin to feel betrayed. That most children fresh off of suppressants can't control the emotions most kids grow up learning how to use, and they usually explode on their parents. Unfortunately, for those with more volatile quirks, it ends with their parents' death. The boy nodded slowly, turning to look back at the streets, and Aizawa high-fived himself at the save. I definitely felt that, the boy whispered, his hand going back to his chest. I didn't kill her, but I said a lot of things no one should say to their parent. She tried to inject me again, when she found out I didn't take the dose, and I resisted, I really did, but as soon as I felt that needle touch my skin, my thoughts just seemed to fly out of the window. It was replaced with that anger, and I threw her away, because my flames wanted to punish her, and I didn't want to become like my father. His father uses flames, and so does he. How many flame villains are out there again? She said that that's why she has me on medication. He made quotations in the air at the word he spat out. Because as soon as I'm off of it, I'm hurting people, and she said I'll be just like my dad. I got mad and said I hated her, and told her she could rot in hell. Then I ran. Aizawa didn't have words for that. When was the first time she injected you? All parents were different when villain webbing their children. Some did it a few years after their quirk manifestation, some did it after an incident that reminded them of the villain, and some did it a few days after the manifestation, in order to get the suppressants. I had my first injection not even an hour after I manifested my quirk. Aizawa said in a breath. That meant his mother was expecting him to have his father's quirk. She had already gotten the suppressants from a dealer, which usually took a few days, and had been ready to use them as soon as the boy showed his flames. Wow! He breathed, before his hero phone pinged, and he pulled it out. Be on the lookout for a 14-year-old boy with green hair and green eyes. Midoriya Izuku is a runaway. It was from Tsukachi. He looked over to the boy and yep, green hair and green eyes. Midoriya Izuku? The boy jolted, but nodded. He looked down at his phone and unlocked it, before looking back at the boy. I'm going to tell the police I have you, but I need you to tell me who your parents are, and if your mother was malicious or protective. She sounded malicious, but he needed the kid to confirm it. The boy curled into himself at the villain part, and his voice was a whisper, as if he was already expecting Aizawa to snap at him. Promise you won't hate me? Aizawa instantly nodded. This boy would not be held accountable for what his father had done. Midoriya Inko. And Holocaust. The air left Aizawa's lungs. He remembers it like yesterday, the news saying that Holocaust had burned down an elders' hospital, but not just any elders' hospital, his parents' hospital. He had been sitting on the couch, and in the next moment he was speeding down the highway, praying and praying that they had been one of the 20 survivors, but not even a week later he was burying his parents. He hated Holocaust. Hated Holocaust. And here was that monster's son. The boy cringed, and Aizawa realized that the boy was expecting that reaction. He was expecting Aizawa to scream at him, call him a villain and leave him to his abusive mother. Aizawa took a deep breath, and in a bout of uncharacteristicness, he placed his hand on the boy's hair. It's okay, I'm sorry. The boy stared at him in shock, tears welling up in his eyes, but Aizawa turned back to his phone and dialed Tsukachi. Hello? Eraserhead? Did you find Tsukachi? He said, cutting the man off. Midoriya Izuku is in the final stage of the villain's web. Midoriya Inko injected him an hour after he manifested his quirk. Tsukachi se in a startled breath, and he exhaled in horror. He said something to someone else on his end, before speaking to Aizawa again. There's a Bakugou Katsuki and Katsuki here, ask him if they know. He turned to Midoriya, and the boy looked at him at the movement. Oh yeah, they were sighting in rain. Good job, Aizawa, you're going to get the boy sick. Do you know a Bakugou Katsuki and Katsuki? Midoriya's eyes widened. Yeah, but I don't think they know. Aizawa put the phone back to his ear. He says he doesn't think they know. Tsukachi sighed, and there was the sound of paper rustling before a pen clicked. Okay, I'm filing him right now. Who's his parent? Holocaust. Tsukachi jolted at the name, but did an excellent job at pretending he didn't. Okay, Midoriya Izuku, age 14, son of Holocaust, is in the final stage of the villain's web. His first injection was an hour after he manifested his quirk. Does he have his father's quirk? I have my quirk, Midoriya said hotly, and it was probably offensive to him. I can emit flames from my skin and I have a much stronger form of telekinesis. Aizawa relayed this to the detective, the man's pen furiously scribbling all of it down, before asking if he had been physically abused at all. She slapped me in the face earlier, and used her quirk to throw me into a wall. Ugh, when I was younger she would often violently jab the needles into my arms to stop my fire, and that left nasty cuts she sometimes didn't heal. Aizawa stared at the boy, and tried very hard to push his hatred down. This woman was walking a very fine line. As he told Tsukachi this, he could practically feel the man's anger radiating from the phone, and he didn't even want to pray for Midoriya Inko. She had it coming. All right. Tsukachi said happily, trying desperately to hide the resentment that Aizawa could still hear. We can charge Midoriya Inko with villain webbing, first-degree attempted murder, child abuse, illegal quirk suppressant possession, all the usual with malicious villain webbers. Aizawa nodded, and relayed the information to the boy. He looked sick at every illegal thing he had been going through, every illegal thing his mother had done just because she had married the wrong man. Is that okay with you? Aizawa asked slowly, ignoring Tsukachi saying that even if he wasn't okay with it, she would still be condemned. Midoriya bit his lip and shifted, staring down at the ground as a green flame the size of a baseball leapt off of his arm, taking the shape of a koi fish as it swam around his chest. Aizawa watched, mesmerized because this wasn't Holocaust's quirk. He remembered what the boy said. I have my quirk. It seems like he was telling the truth, because Holocaust's quirk destroyed, while his son's created. That's okay with me. Aizawa looked up at the broken whisper, but the boy kept his eyes to the ground. He told Tsukachi to proceed with the questioning and hung up the phone before standing. Let's figure out what to do with you, okay? As soon as Aizawa hung up the phone, Tsukachi linked his hands together and pressed his forehead against them. It seemed like for every villain they caught, they had at least one kid being villain-webbed. It made heroes try and catch the villains faster, that way these innocent kids can stop suffering. He stood up, filing away the idea to check the quirkless kids, and collected the paper he had written on Midoriya Inko's crimes, along with all of Holocaust's, making for a pretty thick file. He had sent a few policemen to cuff and take the three of them into a questioning room. He was originally going to separate them, like normal, but he decided that since the woman and son didn't know about how much Midoriya Inko was abusing her son, he was going to question them all together. She would basically tell them what she was doing to her son. Tsukachi exited his office with a smirk. Oh, how he loved ruining malicious villain webbers. Sansa Tamakawa was standing outside the one-way glass, and he pet his head at the smirk on Tsukachi's face. He hadn't told any of them the reason, so he understood their confusion. A malicious villain webber, Tsukachi said, and Sana's eyes widened. He nodded and motioned to the door. When Tsukachi slipped into the room, the blonde woman was instantly on her feet, loudly questioning why they were there, and Midoriya Inko was right behind her, asking if her quirkless baby was okay. But Tsukachi had to try extremely hard to push down the grin that wanted to spill onto his face. He pulled the seat out and sat down, motioning for the women to take their seats. For some reason, the blonde boy was extremely tense, as if he was seconds away from being sentenced to death. Good evening, he said, a pleasant start to what was going to become very, very ugly. Do you know why you are here? No, I don't. What the hell is going on? The blonde lady said. He looked over at the green-haired lady, ignoring the way the blonde boy got even tenser. Midoriya Inko, do you know why you're here? She wouldn't meet his eyes, and he instantly knew she was going to lie. No lie. He sat back. Looks like she was going to be a hard one to crack. He crossed his arms. Are you sure? I'm sure. But he shook his head. Midoriya-san, my quirk is called Human Lie Detector. I know when someone is lying to me. The woman froze, and the blonde lady was whipping her gaze from him and her friend. The boy just looked confused. I'll admit to it, the lady whispered, but they have to leave the room. Inko, what the F is going on? The blonde lady asked, but her friend ignored her. Tsukachi wanted to bare his teeth really badly, but this was being recorded. Dang. I'm afraid you're in no position to be making demands, Midoriya-san. How about this? I'll ask you a question, and you answer it truthfully. Lying will only hurt your case more. The woman seemed at war with herself, but she eventually nodded. Okay. Splendid. He opened the file in front of him and pulled the list of charges he had out. Midoriya Inko, are you aware that villain webbing is illegal? Villain webbing? What the hell is villain webbing? The blonde lady said, her son looking just as confused. Midoriya curled into herself. Yes. Her friend whipped around to face her. Inko, what the F is happening? Bakugou-san, Tsukachi cut her off, writing down what Midoriya had said, and the lady turned her angry red eyes his way. Please keep your questions to yourself until the end, thank you. The lady was trembling in anger, but she shut her mouth and crossed her arms, slumping back into her seat with a glare. Tsukachi turned back to the woman who still wouldn't meet his eyes. Are you aware that harboring quirk suppressants is also illegal? Both Bakugous froze at this, and Tsukachi felt sadistic glee when the greenette flinched. It appears she had told the world that her son was quirkless. Yes. Tsukachi was writing as he spoke, and he ignored the way his hand began aching at his death grip. Are you aware that illegally suppressing a child's quirk is considered the worst form of child abuse? Yes. This malicious speech. No, keep it together, Naomasa. This is being recorded. The only thing making him feel better was the way the Bakugous seemed to be getting more and more shocked, getting closer and closer to horror. Are you aware that illegally suppressing a child's quirk is attempted first-degree murder? Oh my god, Bakugou Katsuki whispered, her voice holding so many emotions, and Midoriya flinched at the tone. Yes. My hand hurts. Are you aware that your son is in the final stage of the villain's web and is on the verge of death? Yes. Instantly, Bakugou Katsuki's hands went and covered her mouth in horror, while her son launched himself out of his chair, his eyes red and angry. I knew it. He cried, I knew he had a quirk. Tsukachi looked over at the boy. He wanted to start his questioning too. If you knew Midoriya Izuku had a quirk, why didn't you tell anyone when he suddenly didn't have one anymore? The boy's shoulders dropped, and he sat back down, glaring at the wall as he crossed his arms. Everyone thought I was crazy. I thought it was just the adrenaline from almost being hit by a car. His mother whispered, and Midoriya started shaking. Okay, Midoriya-san. I have a few more questions and then we'll move on to your friend, okay? The lady nodded slowly, before flinching when her friend incredulously stared at her. What exactly is your son's quirk? He knew what it was, he just needed to see if she even knew what it was before she got rid of it. He has a strong form of telekinesis, she whispered, and her friend instantly glared at the table, shaking in anger. And he can control fire just like his father. How exactly are his flames at all like his father's? He was going to ask Bakugou if she knew who her best friend was married to. It seems as though Midoriya was still legally Akatani, she just had someone rid of the written evidence of their marriage. She honestly thought it would be that easy. I don't know, the woman stuttered. It's fire and it comes out of his mouth. But Tsukachi hummed, wrote it down, and let his hand have a small break. That's funny, the boy says it come out of his very pores, not his mouth. The woman stared at him with wide eyes, and he smiled pleasantly at her, until his hand no longer felt like falling off. He picked up his pen and wrote down her lie. I did tell you to not lie to me, Midoriya-san. His eyes darted over to glance at Mitsuki. Does Bakugou-san know who your husband is? Midoriya was out of her seat in a second, her chair banging against the floor loudly. We're not married. But, he hummed, burning a marriage. Contract does not divorce you two. What's happening? The Bakugou boy said, and he sounded so utterly confused that Tsukachi turned his entire body to face him, a pleasant smile on his lips. Do you know who Midoriya Inko is married to? I didn't even know she was married. She said her boyfriend did a runner. He leaned back and wrote that down. Well, her husband is now in Tartarus, so no need to worry about him. What? It wasn't even a question. The lady sounded so confused, but Tsukachi was not done making Midoriya Inko suffer. I really hate villain webbers. Midoriya Inko, do you want to tell your best friend who you're married to, or should I? The woman glared at the ground, tears falling from her eyes, but she pressed her lips together. He turned to the Bakugous. Midoriya Inko here, or should I say, Akatani Inko, is married to the mass murderer Holocaust. The boy's mouth dropped, and his mother instantly pressed her hands to her mouth. No, she breathed. You're lying. He stood up and closed his file. Ask your best friend. He walked away before pausing beside the door. Honestly, you three should be thankful that you're alive. Most webbed children with volatile quirks kill their parents because of the uncontrollable hatred they feel. Midoriya Izuku could have killed all three of you, and it wouldn't have been a crime. He opened the door and grinned, shutting the door behind him, nodding at Sansa's approving look. No one liked people like Midoriya Inko. Villain webbers don't even get trials, and that's another reason the government never makes it public, because the media would have a field day knowing certain child abusers are immediately sent to jail. It was to ensure that a webber never got away unpunished. It's your turn, Midoriya Inko. Is it bad that even though I have these new emotions in my chest, I don't feel anything for my mother? Aizawa paused, but handed the boy a towel and some of his clothes from high school, because he had seen the way the boy glared at his own chest. They had stopped by Aizawa's apartment, because he didn't like the fact that the boy would be sitting in the police station with sopping wet clothes and his web visible for everyone to see. It's not that the web was overly hideous. Most kids just feel extremely self-conscious about it, because they knew that their bodies were dying, and they didn't like that everyone else would know that too. I don't know. You're the first kid with the web that I've ever dealt with. The boy nodded slowly and thanked him for the clothes, before slipping into the bathroom to change. Aizawa had already changed, so he slumped onto the couch and tilted his head back. He was a stoic man, he took shit from nobody, and he didn't bother caring about a student's tears when he expels them, but something about the way Midoriya Izuku's eyes looked, so very tired and dead, made his heart twinge in sympathy. That boy was so young, and he had already dealt with things most adults couldn't even fathom of going through. He had his whole life in front of him, and it had almost ended, simply because his quirk resembled his father's. Thank you for letting me borrow some of your clothes. He looked up and nodded at the boy. Aizawa had been lanky in high school, and still his clothes hung off of the boy's frame, and he felt that anger burn in his chest. He stood up, handed the boy a sweater, and grabbed an umbrella. We'll drive, that way you don't get sick and really die. The boy huffed a breath before Aizawa realized that joking about death with someone who was dying way probably not what you're supposed to do. This is why I'm not a parent, he sighed. I would say all the wrong things. The car ride was silent, but Aizawa kept glancing at the boy through the mirror, a weird feeling in his chest making him worry that the boy would stop breathing or something. So your quirk, he said, and Midoriya looked up at him. It leaves those blue marks in your skin? Midoriya looked down at his arms, the sweater sitting in his lap, and tilted them in the dim lighting, their shine resembling the moonlight hitting the sea at night. My telekinesis does this, he said, and one of the blue lines curled around his arm, before disappearing. It comes off like a bracelet? I don't know, I can't see it, but I can feel it. Aizawa hummed, and parked at the police station. He turned to look at the boy in the back seat, ready to say something, but the boy was already tense, so he opted to keep his mouth shut. Do you even need an umbrella? Or can you make all of the rain just go around you? The boy's eyes brightened in excitement, and he whispered, there's only one way to find out. No. Aizawa did not like this boy's mentality. He sounded like a troublemaker. He opened the door, and slid out, opening his umbrella to stop the rain from spilling onto his fresh clothes. He closed the door, and Midoriya slid out of the back, standing beside Aizawa with a sheet-eating grin. It was weird, to see rain part over someone's head, see it go into a different direction and defy gravity. It looked like the boy had an umbrella over his head, except said umbrella was nowhere to be seen. Aizawa whistled. Cool. The boy beamed, and they made their way into the police station, where they were immediately directed into Tsukachi's office. Midoriya Izuku, it's nice to meet you, Tsukachi said as they exchanged bows. I want to start off by personally apologizing for the state you have been put into due to our ignorance. Midoriya looked startled, but he shook his head with a small smile. It's okay, I'm just glad it's over. Tsukachi nodded and sat back, before pulling out his file and clicking his pen. I'm going to ask just a few questions, to make sure you're not lying or exaggerating anything. It is common procedure. I apologize. He rushed to add when the boy's face twisted in anger. Midoriya nodded slowly. Okay. All right, Midoriya Izuku, you have 2 quirks, correct? A telekinesis and flame control. Yes. Your mother has been webbing you since you were 4? The boy paused. Yes. Bakugou Katsuki is your childhood friend, correct? How did he not tell that you were suddenly quirkless? The boy flinched at that one, and shifted in his seat. I wouldn't call us friends. We sort of split apart when I became quirkless. He saw it as me looking down on him, and he began bullying me. Hitting me, burning me, pushing me around. He suicide baited me. Truth. What? Aizawa suddenly snarled, and the boy cringed away at the tone. You didn't tell anyone? The boy looked guilty. I didn't have the emotions to care what he was doing to me. Tsukachi inhaled while Aizawa pinched his nose, and Tsukachi shot him a look. Aizawa has never acted this way for a runaway. Granted, said Runaway was the child of the villain who murdered his parents, and is in the final stage of the villain's web, but still. Aizawa looked almost worried about the boy, instead of the usual him coming in, dropping the kid off, and leaving back for his patrol. An idea was slowly creeping up on Tsukachi's mind, and he tried to squash down the feeling of elation, but was unsuccessful as a smile spread his lips wide. "So, Eraserhead," he said, and the man snapped over to look at him, eyes narrowed at the tone. "You're staying with this young man?" Aizawa froze, and he knew he hit the nail on the head. Aizawa didn't want to leave the boy alone, be it because he was worried, or because his paranoia of Midoriya being Holocaust's son was getting to him. Where would he stay? "If we're not sending him to the Bakugou's house?" he said slowly, and Tsukachi raised an eyebrow. He didn't say they weren't sending Midoriya to the Bakugou's, that was Aizawa's paternal instinct speaking up, and Tsukachi grinned. 30 years old, and the man finally connects with a child. "Are you offering your apartment?" he asked, a sheet-eating grin on his face as Aizawa spluttered. "What? Owen?" "It's okay," Midoriya spoke softly, staring down at his pretty blue and white swirls. "I don't mind being placed in an orphanage." But instantly, Aizawa turned back to the detective. "I'm offering my apartment." Tsukachi grinned, and opened his desk to pull out the transfer of guardianship paperwork. "Really?" he heard the child breathe. "You're not bothered that I'm a villain spawn?" "No one said you were a villain spawn, Midoriya. I wouldn't have offered if you bothered me in any way." He heard the boy sniffle, and he pulled the paperwork out of his desk, just in time to see Aizawa reach over and pat the boy on the head. Tsukachi grinned, and Aizawa glared at him, before scooting his chair forwards, right in front of Tsukachi's desk. "This is okay with you, right, Midoriya?" Tsukachi asked, holding the pen from Aizawa. The boy sniffed and wiped his eyes, but the tears seemed never-ending. "Yeah." His voice broke, but Tsukachi's quirk took it as a truth. Aizawa signed the papers, and so did Midoriya, before Tsukachi put it into the system. He turned to the man and smiled. "You now have a charge." The man's shoulders relaxed, and Midoriya looked 3 seconds away from crying. "Do you want to talk to your mother before she's given her verdict?" Midoriya looked a little shocked. "She's not getting a court hearing?" Tsukachi shook his head. Villain webbers never get hearings because there is a chance they could wiggle themselves away from charges, and then that child would be sent right back into their clutches. We had many children die from that, so the government decided that webbers don't deserve hearings. Midoriya looked down to the ground, digesting the news that he basically sent his mother to jail. He actually didn't care. He shook his head. "I don't think I'll be able to control myself if I see her. I would like to speak with the Bakugous, though." "All right," he said, standing. "We'll have Bakugou given a trial for." "No!" Midoriya cried, and both adults tuned to him, incredulous. "Don't do that, he won't be able to attend Yui. Yui only accepts students with potential hero material," Aizawa said, turning to his charge. "Someone who's bullied and suicide-baited." "I want to get into Yui," Midoriya said, and his eyes began glowing, the green light illuminating his face. "And when I do, I want him to be there, so I can show him why he was wrong to ever hurt me." The boy paused after the snarl left his mouth, smoke curling from his lips. "I'm sorry," he said, pressing a hand to his chest. "I don't know where that came from." Tsukachi looked shocked, but he nodded. "I'm sure. We can figure something out." Aizawa whipped around to face him. "Tsukachi!" He held up a hand. "It's the first request of your child, do you want to deny it?" Aizawa flushed at the reminder, and crossed his arms, grumbling under his breath, while Midoriya's eyes shined. "Come on, Squirt," Tsukachi said, walking away before he could even realize what he called the boy. "The Bakugous are this way. Sansa had to separate the two women before it got ugly. We'll come in and stop you if you lose control of your emotions, okay? Don't be afraid to walk away." Midoriya nodded, and Tsukachi stopped in front of the door. Sansa was staring at the small, innocent-looking boy in shock, and Tsukachi understood. He couldn't believe it either. "Are you ready?" he asked, and Midoriya took a deep breath, his blue ribbons on his arms glowing, and he nodded. Tsukachi opened the door, and Midoriya stepped inside. Two pairs of red eyes turned towards him, but he calmly walked over to the seat and sat down, crossing his arms like he wasn't 3 seconds away from setting the building on fire. I need to control these emotions. I don't want to end up as my father. Izuku, Mitsuki whispered, and Midoriya looked into her red-rimmed, red eyes. Is it true? Were you really on quirk suppressants? Midoriya stared into her eyes, searching for any deceit, but only saw shock, horror, and denial. So she really didn't know what his mother had been doing. He grabbed the collar of Aizawa's loose dark shirt and pulled it down. It went to the middle of his pecs, but it showed his nasty spiderweb, his illegal web scarring. Oh my God, Mitsuki said, her hands covering her mouth. Izuku, I am so sorry. Why didn't you tell anyone? Midoriya looked over to Bakugou, but he was glaring at the table, unable to make eye contact. If Midoriya knew what guilt looked like, he still wouldn't have linked it to what Bakugou's face was doing. I was the worthless, quirkless Deku, he said, and Bakugou violently flinched. Do you think you would have believed me? I knew you had a quirk. And yet, he snarled, steam rising from his skin as the anger coiled in his stomach, a pot ready to boil over. His blue ribbons shone brighter, trying to comfort him, and he could see the blue and green glow shining in Bakugou's red eyes. You still told me to take a swan dive off the roof of a building, didn't you? Mitsuki was out of her seat in an instant, stumbling away from her son in horror, her hands pressed to her mouth to stop the sob trying to escape. Katsuki, tell me he's lying. You didn't. You didn't suicide bait him, tell me you didn't. Her voice was shaking, and she looked 3 seconds from completely breaking down. Her best friend had been lying to her the entire time. Their entire friendship was built upon lies and deceit. That was once harsh blow, and then she finds out her own son suicide baited someone. Not just anyone, but her best friend's son, his best friend. Midoriya almost felt bad for dropping all of this onto her shoulders in one night, but his anger was lashing against his chest, making sure there was room for no other emotion. Bakugou's head was dropped, his hair shadowing his face, body shaking, but his voice was strong as he spoke. I did. Oh my God. Mitsuki cried, and her tears came spilling out of her eyes as she collapsed to the floor. How could you? It's okay, Mitsuki-san. He said, did you know the police want to send you to jail? Both Bakugous looked up quick at that, shock mirroring their faces. Midoriya looked at his ribbons, feigning apathy. Yeah, apparently, suicide baiting a minor is one thing, but suicide baiting a minor with the villain's web is another. He locked eyes with Bakugou, and a snarl pulled his lips back. I could have you destroyed just like my mother. Bakugou was staring at him, but he didn't argue. He dropped his head and clenched his hands, like he knew it was going to happen, and now that it did, there was no stopping it. Don't worry, I told them not to. I saved you, from what would have become your worst nightmare. Bakugou's head snapped up, and his eyes were shocked, watering up, but otherwise gone ignored. Mitsuki was staring at Midoriya like she had never seen him before. Do you know what that means, Kaken? The boy flinched at the nickname Midoriya hasn't used since he lost his quirk. That means you're indebted to me. I got you out of jail before it could scar your perfect record, and that will allow you to attend Yui. Why? The blonde boy breathed, and Midoriya smiled pleasantly, his eyes glowing brighter as the wind picked up in the room. Steam curled off of his body and he allowed the fire to rise right up to the surface, making his skin glow just a little dimmer than his eyes. Mitsuki looked shocked, as if she hadn't really believed he had a quirk. So I can show you that you were wrong to ever lay a finger on me. Bakugou flinched at his tone, and Midoriya scoffed, some of the flame coming out of his mouth and making Mitsuki squeak. He stood up and turned towards the door, having nothing left to say to them, but Mitsuki had a question for him. How strong is your quirk? She asked, and Midoriya turned to see her pulling herself to shaky feet. He wanted to ignore her. He wanted to smirk at her and her stupid son and say that that was for him to know, and then to never find out. He wanted it to be like his wild card, something he only pulled out when everyone was sure he had nothing left. Then he remembered that Mitsuki hadn't known. She wasn't a part of his mother's scheme, and she didn't know how much of an a-hole her son is. That doesn't mean it's her fault. His arms shone blue as his invisible line shot out and gently wrapped around Mitsuki, Bakugou, the chairs and the table, lifting them into the air as she shrieked in shock. Aizawa's voice rang out of the intercom. "Keep control, Midoriya." He nodded and set everything down, before looking down at his hand. He decided he was going to try and create Tsukachi. He held his hand out, and his fire burst out of his container, spilling from his chest and curling around his form as Bakugou choked on his spit. He made his fire begin forming how he remembered Tsukachi, his short black hair, his body shape and clothing, his facial features and the tone of his voice. It was amazing, seeing his fire well up and spin. Quickly, forming a fiery figure of a man, before his fire glowed white, and sunk into skin, where Tsukachi was now standing in the room. Both Bakugous were staring at him in shock, not able to get their brains to work, and he made his fire Tsukachi go pull the chair out, before sitting himself down. The detective crossed his hands, and smiled pleasantly at the mother and son. "Greetings, Bakugou-sen," he made it say, grinning when the voice came out spot on. "I have a few questions for you, if you wouldn't mind?" "What the actual effing hell?" Mitsuki whispered, before collapsing into the seat Midoriya had pulled behind her. "That's... what the hell just happened?" Fire Tsukachi pet his head to the side. "You didn't see?" "Of course I saw that. That was effing crazy." Midoriya jolted when he felt his fire creation send an impulse at him, and he suddenly knew Mitsuki was telling the truth. Holy... His jaw dropped and he whipped around to stare at the one-way mirror, before turning back to Mitsuki. "Mitsuki-san," Midoriya said excitedly, bouncing in his chair. "Lie." "What?" "Bakugou-san," Fire Tsukachi spoke. "How old are you?" Mitsuki glanced at Midoriya but looked his creation in the eye and said, 16. "But... oh my effing god!" He shrieked, launching himself out of his chair, launching. He held his hand out and Tsukachi's form melted away to his swirling green fire, and he began creating Bakugou, just because he was the first person that came to mind. 2 Bakugous in the same room was too much for him, but he still forced Fire Bakugou to turn to Real Bakugou and look him up and down. Fire Bakugou scoffed, and Real Bakugou's eyes blew open. "Fucking shitty face," he grumbled, and Midoriya grinned. He made Fire Bakugou hold his hand out, and on command, an explosion came from his hand. "Oh my god!" He cried happily, Bakugou's look melting off of his fire as it swirled around him happily, his ribbons dancing across his arms. "That's so wow. I didn't know I could do that." Both Bakugous just stared at him, and he beamed at Katsuki. "Not a worthless deadbeat anymore, Hakaken?" The boy didn't look like he could say anything, so he turned around and walked out of the door, licks of fire coming off of his skin in his excitement. He was met with 3 shocked faces, and he smiled sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You just made me," Tsukachi deadpanned. "Out of your fire." "Yep." Midoriya chirped, rocking on his heels as his smile threatened to blind the 3 men. "So, what happens now?" "We're going home and you're going to get settled in," Aizawa said, shaking his head to get rid of his awe. "Oh," Midoriya said. "I got someone's number and I need it. Can I get my phone, please?" Suddenly Tsukachi was listening, and he had a small smirk on his face. "Whose number did you get that you absolutely need it?" Midoriya opened his mouth to answer, before the man's teasing tone registered in his mind and his jaw dropped. His face flushed, but his own smirk made its way onto his lips. "My future boyfriends." Aizawa and Tsukachi choked, while Midoriya just laughed. Living with Aizawa was different from living with his mother. I mean, obviously, because one was a mother and the other is a father. He had never really experienced a father figure, but he had seen it with Masaru, the way he acted with Bakugou, and it made him ache. He used to sit in his room in color, wondering what it would be like to have a father that would toss him on his shoulders and carry him around the room, laughing. To have someone teach him how to ride a bike, how to swim, to play baseball, and pick up love interests, how to build a fort and shoot a paintball gun correctly, to have someone who would love him unconditionally just because he was their blood and flesh. But he never did. He had to teach himself how to do some of those things, others he never learned just because he didn't have the ability to want to learn how to do those things. Living with Aizawa was better. Aizawa never forced him to do things he didn't want to, like wear white or tight shirts, because white made him feel exposed, and tight shirts made him feel like he was being forced into his cage again. Maybe later he would learn to love tighter shirts, just because his love would swoon at the sight of his toned body, and Midoriya loved catching him. Aizawa didn't judge him on anything he did. Except for that one time he ate the banana with ketchup. Aizawa banned him from the kitchen after that. He was open-minded with anything Midoriya asked, only questioning him if he was confused or didn't understand Midoriya's reasoning. For the first time, he was given the choice of clothing, his hairstyle, what he put in his bedroom, everything. He could speak his mind, as long as it was with a certain level of respect, and Aizawa wouldn't get mad at him over small things. He didn't yell at him, hit him, ignore him, nothing. He was gentle, kinder than his mother. Aizawa congratulated him every time he discovered something with his quirk, and encouraged him to continue experimenting with it. He even learned to make katsudon for Midoriya, and it always tasted better than his mother's. He believed that a secret ingredient was being used, something his mother hadn't used, and he had asked Aizawa. "You're my charge, basically my son. It's called fatherly love," Aizawa said, looking up at Midoriya, and he could see it was true. He had cried so hard that night, because he finally had a father, finally had someone who would love him unconditionally. He had been nervous, shaking, and he had sat down at the table for breakfast like he was fine, but Aizawa could apparently see through his act, and asked him what was wrong. He had blurted out a request, and the man seemed shocked, but he had given Midoriya one of his rare smiles. After living with the pro-hero Eraserhead for almost 3 months, he legally became an Aizawa. It was the happiest day of his life. One of the first things he had done after moving in with Aizawa was cut his hair. He got an undercut, but left his hair long enough to have fringe just barely brushing against his eyebrows, and he personally thought he looked better. He had then gone and gotten a new wardrobe, consisting of darker colors to bring out his brighter green eyes. He had been iffy about that one, because he didn't want to hurt Aizawa's bank like his mother often complained new clothes did, but the man had put his hands on his shoulder and said he was a single underground hero. He had plenty of money to go around. He had also attempted straightening his hair, which took away the curly bush, and just made his hair wavy, bringing out the black undertones. He looked like he could be related to Aizawa now, not like the man had just picked up a stray from the street. Which he technically did, but no one needs to know. He met Aizawa's high school squad, and they loved him. He was so scared, meeting the people who have been friends with Aizawa trough thick and thin, scared they would hate him and then Aizawa would rid of him, but they adored him. It didn't help his heart that they were all heroes. Midnight, Namuri Kiyama, had dubbed him Tater Tot, for some reason. She said it was because tater tots were grated and deep-fried, but when they were done they were absolutely delicious. Midoriya had been through a cheese grater of pain and agony, his own flames burning him from the inside out, but he was done, and he was absolutely adorable. He loved her, and she returned the emotion. She filled the mother-shaped hole in his heart that had been empty his entire life. Present Mike was like an uncle, one of those awesome, laid-back uncles who let you do all the things your parents didn't. Except, Midoriya had seen the way Yamada Hisashi looked at Aizawa, and he was FENG plotting. He was Yamada's little bean, something that held much more meaning than his usual little listener. Ingenium took a bit more to come around, just because he wasn't used to the way Midoriya acted, affectionate, starved, and craving love, while his brother was an uptight rule book who didn't even like hugs. Once he did though, Ida Tensei was that one teasing uncle who wouldn't shut up about your crush. But it was great. He had a family. He even met Nizu. God, that principal was crazy. He had offered Midoriya an instant spot in the heroics course and a provisional license if he would show Nizu everything he could do with his quirk. He felt that it was something to do with his relation to Holocaust, that the principal was keeping a close eye on him to make sure he didn't twist and become his father. Maybe that hurt at first, but Nizu offering him a provisional license in apology was immediately forgiven. So he could use his quirk, legally, whenever he wanted. His classmates would have a FING field day, and it would be amazing. Aizawa had wanted to pull him out of the school when he realized that Midoriya was being bullied and neglected, but Midoriya convinced him not to. He had his emotions along with his quirk, and with his provisional license. He couldn't be hurt or touched. He maybe sort of threatened his principal to report his school if he didn't whip his teachers back into shape, and with Hironizu sitting by his side, the man frantically agreed. The first day back was going to be fun. His alarm blared in his ears, and he immediately launched it into the closet, where its beeping was muffled, and he could ignore it. Unfortunately, Aizawa didn't think the same. His door opened, and the horrible man snatched his alarm clock out of its prison and set it back on his nightstand. No, he ummed and rolled over, smashing his head underneath one of the million pillows Aizawa had gotten him. Come on, Izuku, you have to go to school. Weren't you super excited about it? That was before I remembered I had to wake up. He mumbled, his voice muffled but still pouty. He heard Aizawa chuckle softly, and the man walked back to his door. If you're not done in 5 minutes, I'm eating your unadon. He laughed when Midoriya was suddenly thrashing in his blankets, his school uniform flying out of his closet as he struggled to get out of his PJs. I'm timing you. Aizawa called through the closed door, and shook his head amusedly when he passed by the bathroom, the sink running as the floating toothbrush got lathered in toothpaste. Not even 10 seconds later, Midoriya was tumbling out of his room and dashing into the bathroom, his shoes unlacing themselves by the door and his backpack floating to the table where all of his schoolwork was shoved inside. Aizawa watched this with amused eyes, his smile hidden by his coffee cup. Midoriya's 2 minutes in the bathroom were done, and he launched himself into the seat with a triumph cry. He looked over at the counter, and blanched when he saw the time. It's 5 in the morning? He screeched, and Aizawa ducked into his coffee to hide his laughter. You woke me up at 5 in the morning? Aizawa gulped the rest of his coffee down like a shot, and looked at his son with unapologetic eyes. Kiyama wanted to say goodbye before you went back to school, like we're sending you off to war. Midoriya's eyes narrowed. Did you, or did you not make unadon? Aizawa stood and rinsed his mug in the sink, an evil smirk on his face. Kiyama's bringing it. Midoriya instantly slumped over in his chair, a loud thump telling Aizawa he had fallen to the floor. You're so mean. He whined before bolting to the door when it rung. Tater tot. Nemuri squealed, and Midoriya was wrapped up in her arms, squished against her like a teddy bear. I missed you. Aizawa walked over and snatched the food bags from the woman with a nod, and Midoriya whined when the food was, once again, out of his reach. Are you ready to go back for the last week of school? She asked, setting the boy down and closing the door. You're saying this like you really are sending me to war. Midoriya said, just a tiny bit worried. Because we are. Nemuri gasped, before snatching him and cuddling him to her chest again. My baby tater tot, being sent off to that horrible school without anyone to protect him. Nemi, he whined, squirming in her grip. This is why he loved Nemuri. He could act like a kid around her, and she wouldn't snap at him and tell him to grow up. He could be the kid he wasn't allowed to be with his biological mother. If he wanted to play a game, she would play it with him, even if it was something as childish as hide and seek. Sometimes Yamada would join in, and that's why he absolutely loved them. Eat your unadon or I will. Instantly, he squeaked and began squirming against the heroine harder. Nemi, I'm going to starve. He cried, and only then did the woman release him, and he plopped down in his seat, rubbing his hands together and licking his lips as Nemuri laughed. He said his thanks when Aizawa placed his plate down, and he tore into his food like he would never eat again. Scary, Nemuri playfully whispered, and Aizawa nodded. You should see him with Katsudon. If he loves it, it's gone in an instant. Midoriya took a breath from eating in order to pout at them. I'm not that bad. They both raised their eyebrows at the same time, and he scrunched his nose at them, before continuing eating. He asked Nemuri how she was doing, and she immediately went off on how someone called her skimpy, and he couldn't help but smile. With any of them, the house was never quiet in the way his mother's was. Even when Aizawa was dead exhausted, he would sit by Midoriya on the couch, and Midoriya could relax. When his mother was tired, he had to cater to her, to make sure she didn't blow up on him, and that left him on his toes. Aizawa wasn't like that, he could handle his own problems, and he never shoved them into Midoriya's shoulders. He really was happy with them. So, how are things going with your boyfriend? Instantly, Midoriya's face lit up, his green glow making Nemuri laugh. He hated when his quirk did that. Whenever he was embarrassed, since he was so in touch with his quirk, it would light up his skin when he blushed. Gosh, it was so embarrassing. He's not my boyfriend, Midoriya muttered, stabbing his chopstick into the unagi. He smirked at Nemuri from the corner of his eyes. Yet. Nemuri put her hands to her cheeks as she squealed, and Aizawa instantly whirled around. No SEC until you're married. Midoriya ped his head to the side, confusion on his features. What's SEC? You could have heard a pin drop. Nope. Aizawa said, launching himself out of his seat. I'm not doing this. Call Chio, call Tensei, call anyone, I'm not doing this. Oh, come on Shota, Nemuri teased. That's the best part about parenting. Aizawa shuddered. Oh god no. Shut up. It's time for school Izuku, we're leaving. A little confused, Midoriya walked to the door and slipped his shoes on, his backpack floating onto his back as he stood up, Nemuri dying of laughter behind him. Aizawa shut the door behind him, muttering incoherent things under his breath as they walked to his black car in silence. Midoriya slipped into the passenger side, and the car rumbled to life, its gentle purring making Midoriya's telekinesis ribbons swirl around his arms excitedly. They always loved cars, for some reason. What is SEC? Aizawa sighed, and looked like he was 3 seconds away from bashing his head on the steering wheel. That's something adults do to create children. Midoriya blinked. Oh. He shifted in his seat, hugging his backpack to his chest as he smiled. You don't have to worry, I'm not into women, so I won't be having SEC at all. Oh, sweet innocent child, Aizawa whispered, and Midoriya looked at the man in confusion. Never mind. Stay like that forever. Okay. He was a little confused. Aizawa said SEC was something two adults do in order to create children, therefore it's done between a man and women. Midoriya wasn't into women, so Aizawa shouldn't have to worry about him having SEC at all. Which is why he was confused because the man looked up to his ears in awkwardness? The rest of the car ride was spent with Aizawa trying to figure out how he was going to explain such an NTMT thing to his innocent child, while Midoriya hummed a song under his breath and watching everything pass by in a blur. Alright, Aizawa said, slowing by the drop-off lane, all of the kids staring at the nice vehicle they had never seen before. Remember, your provisional license means you can use your quirk in self-defense, but don't go looking for trouble, okay? Midoriya nodded. Thanks, Dad. He froze, but before he could panic, Aizawa ruffled his hair. No problem, son. It was worth it when the boy shot him a beam and waved goodbye after getting out of the car. A car honked at him from behind, and he rolled his eyes with a scoff. Alright, I'm going. As he was driving away, he felt his chest swell with happiness. 30 years old, and he's finally a dad. Midoriya didn't know what he was expecting when he called Aizawa dad, but he wasn't expecting the man to take it in stride. As soon as the man allowed him to be himself, while encouraging his growth, Midoriya automatically began seeing him as his dad. That's what he called him in his mind, and it had slipped out before he could stop it. He smiled and made his way to the classroom. He had been out of school after Aizawa took him under his care, to make no one could slip more poison into his system, but the school said that he had to at least attend the last week of school, or else they wouldn't pass him. That was when Nizu politely threatened them to treat him good, or else. Turns out, once Nizu realized neither he nor his quirk was like his father, he softened and listened to him when he tried to explain a certain emotion he felt in his chest. Nizu was also the sneaky backstabber that told Nemuri when Midoriya realized the emotion in his chest was affection for Todoroki. Nizu called it a crush, and it was the domino effect from there. The Yui staff were at first wary of him, because he came clean as Holocaust's son, not wanting to start their relationship with lies. They had tiptoed around him, until Aizawa snapped at all of them and said Midoriya was in the final stage of the villain's web. It was like a switch was flipped. They were boldly kind to him, offering him things just because, and always making time for him if he needed to talk. It was crazy. All he had to do was leave his mother in order to get all of these people who cared about it. Oh, the quirkless Deku's back. Someone called, and the entire class turned to jab insults at him, before it fell silent at the sight of him. Oh yeah, he grew an inch, now 5 feet 6 inches, which wasn't that short, shut up, and he was filling into his body in the 3 months he had lived with Aizawa. His hair, of course, was cut at the sides and fell straight into his eyes, which he discovered he liked more than at his eyebrows, and his skin had a healthy glow. He ignored everyone as he made his way to his desk, smirking at Bakugou when they locked eyes, the entire class waiting for him to blow up, but the blonde boy just looked away. That's right. I saved you from jail, so you better respect me, 'cause I'm your hero, Beach. Hey, quirkless sheet, someone said, and his shoulder was grabbed. Would him reacting now count as self-defense? Where have you been? Probably crying to mommy about not having a quirk. Someone else snickered, and he was shoved out of his seat while the entire class laughed. Okay, self-defense time. He shoved himself to his feet, and moved his fire into his eyes, which he realized was what made them glow, not his anger. Well, when he was angry, his fire immediately went into his eyes, and that was the shine. The entire class fell silent at the sight, and he pushed his fire to simmer right underneath his skin, making him glow an unearthly green. He smiled politely and pet his head to the side, his hair falling to shadow his glowing left eye. Quirkless, you say? They didn't say anything, and Bakugou had froze. I never said I was quirkless. All of you just assumed it, like the big-headed assholes you are. Excuse me? One of the girls said, stepping towards him with her wind swirling around her hands. How dare you? He looked over at her, and her wind instantly died out, his ribbons wrapping around her hands to stop her quirk usage. She stumbled back, fear written on her face as she tried to get her quirk to work. Midoriya turned towards her, and smiled, pulling his ribbons towards himself, and everyone gasped when the girl slid to a stop in front of him. Did you know that I could send all of you to jail for what you've done to me? His eyes shine brighter, and he allowed smoke to begin curling from his bared teeth. There was a cacophony of loud shouts as the students tried to deny it, before someone shouted at Bakugou. Bakugou, why aren't you putting this quirkless sheet in his place? Shut him up. Because he can't, Midoriya cooed, wondering why the hell the teacher was taking so long. I saved his butt from jail, so he owes me. Bakugou cringed at the reminder, and the entire class turned to look at him in shock. Bakugou in jail? Nah man, he's lying. It's just Deku, since when do we listen to him? But Bakugou hasn't said anything. That's true, Bakugou isn't speaking up for himself. Did Deku really stop him from getting thrown in jail? What did he do to go to jail? Bakugou cleared his throat. Shut up, extras. What does he mean saved you from jail? It was true. Of course it's true. Midoriya snarled, and the fire licking through his teeth made all the students stumble back. That's what happens when you suicide bait a hero's child. What? Deku's not a hero's child. No way. Bakugou suicide baited him? What's happening? Yo, he had fire. You saw that, right? But it's green. Only Endeavor's fire can change color, and Deku's last name isn't Todoroki. Not yet it isn't. Isn't Deku's mom a lawyer? Why did he say a hero? Yeah, did Deku's mom marry a hero? What the F dash, Deku's really a hero child? Oh my god, he could throw us in jail. We were tormenting a hero's child? But I don't want to go to jail. All of the students kept talking and wailing over each other, and Midoriya calmly took his seat, taking his school workout and placing it on his desk, ready for the teacher to hurry the F up. Bakugou's back was ramrod straight, and Midoriya knew it was because Tsukachi told him Midoriya was adopted. He just didn't tell him who adopted him. Bakugou knew his biological father was Holocaust, but Midoriya could shut him up if he ever tried to spill it in malice. Honestly, he didn't give a shit about these classmates, just because all of his hatred was crashing into him, and he was desperately remembering Nizu's therapy, how to calm himself down before he burned the place down. He would feel bad later about throwing Bakugou to the sharks, but right now, he let himself bask in the sadistic glory of bringing him down a couple of pegs. Finally, the teacher walked through the doors, and he waved his hands to shut everyone up. "All right," he shouted, and everyone made their way to their seats. He cast an irritated look Midoriya's way, as if he wanted to blame him, but at a flash of Midoriya's teeth, he turned to start the lesson. Aizawa didn't let him slack in the 3 months they spent making sure no one else would hurt him, and he was proud to say he was ahead of everyone in this classroom. That's what happens when your guardian locks you in a room with a high-specs principal for 3 hours every day. He slipped his phone out of his backpack with his quirk, ignoring the sharp intake behind him, and unlocked it, pretending he was listening to what the teacher was saying. He opened his messages and found his dad's contact. Wow, that was elation at its finest. "I didn't kill anyone, but I intimidated the entire class and told them I was a hero's child. Sigma? Please don't be mad. Where are thou sleep? That I'll steal Kiyama's rich girl car and we'll pick you up. Where are thou sleep? Midoriya 0374. The teacher looked taken aback when he looked up from his phone, and he smiled politely. "That's the answer, is it not?" "Why, it is." He looked stunned but shook his head. Anyways, he continued the lesson, while Midoriya's classmates just stared at him. Nemuri's rich girl car was something she drove around in costume, because it was a gold freaking Acura NSX, one of the newest kinds. She had it shipped from America, so it was large in size and very, very shiny. She had a few other expensive cars, and she said once Midoriya turned 18, he could have one. He pocketed his phone, but he barely listened to what the teacher was saying. Soon enough, the teacher passed out the exam and told them they had 2 hours to complete it. He thought, "Thank you for helping me, Nizu-san." Not to brag or anything, but he was the first one done. The entire class's shock was palpable from where he was sitting, but he pulled out his phone and brightened when he saw Todoroki texted him. "Hotdimit. Izuku im board please hlep. Izuku. Im din gplzzzzz. Your grammar actually kills me. Hotdimit. What tray you gonna do? Tell my shitbag? No, I'll tell Fuyumi-san. Hotdimit. Cold-hearted. Turning my heart to stone." Amongst other things, Midoriya shook his head with a huff. Sometimes, Todoroki said things that didn't make any sense. "Shouldn't you be working? You know, in class?" Hotdimit. Eyes closed face. Don't remind me. Todoroki. Pay attention. Hotdimit. No, I already know what they're talking about. Then who'd talk to you? And it's Shudo. Not Todoroki, don't make me sound like my geezer. Pay attention, Shudo, or I'll tell your sister. Hotdimit. Shot through my heart. Can you feel my sadness? 'Cause I'm putting my phone away. So said. You'll live. Midoriya chuckled, and put his phone in his back pocket, not realizing his cheeks were glowing in his happiness. Talking to Todoroki always made him smile. At first, the boy was very blunt, short words and shorter sentences, but he eventually warmed up and assaulted Midoriya with his terrible grammar. One time, he wrote in just numbers and symbols to make Midoriya smile because he wasn't having a good day. Midoriya had laughed and taken delight in solving it, trying to ignore his mother's birthday. It had said, "Never frown because I love your smile." Todoroki always made that feeling in his chest grow, tumbling in his stomach as if butterflies were taking flight. He had honestly freaked out when he first felt that, to the point where he was shaking in Nemuri's arms, trying to understand what he felt, and she held him while he explained it. She said that that was a part of the feelings involved with a crush, and she had cuddled him tight, squeaking incoherently as he laughed. When the bell rang, he was out of his seat in an instant, making his way to the door, and all of his classmates seemed to scramble after him, anxious to see if he was lying. Upon exiting the building, he beamed and held back his laughter, because sure enough, Nemuri's rich girl car was sitting in the pickup line, its golden shimmer attracting everyone's attention as people whistled and took pictures. He heard his classmates start exclaiming in shock at the car they've never seen before. He shot a smirk at them, and they tittered in confusion, but they fell silent like he pressed a mute button as he made his way to the car. The car unlocked as he stood beside it, and he slid into the passenger side, turning to look almost all his classmates in the eyes. Their jaws were slack and their eyes were bulging. A few faces were turning red in jealousy, but he winked at them before blowing a kiss. He shut the door after that. So, how did that feel, Tater Tot? He turned to Namuri with a huge beam. She smiled softly at his happiness. That felt amazing. The next week was actually pretty awesome, despite his classmates being super jealous that Midnight had picked him up from school. During class, could hear their whispering about him, but he did his best to ignore it. Their arguments were mostly about who he texted like a lovesick child, the girls leaning towards someone he paid to pose as his girlfriend, and the boys leaning towards Midnight. For some reason, he had been staring out of the window in boredom when he felt his phone vibrate with Todoroki's personalized vibration. He slipped it out of his back pocket and unlocked it excitedly, ignoring his classmates who were suddenly interested in what he was doing. Hot damn it. Tell your dad I'm picking you up. I want to take you somewhere. Carrot. He opened his dad's contact and shifted to the left, cutting off the person's vision behind him, hearing them curse. Like he was going to let them read his conversations. Hey Dad, Shuda wants to pick me up after school. Says he wants to take me somewhere. Where are thou sleep? First date? No? He just wants to take me somewhere. Where are thou sleep? Sure. Just text me if you need to be picked up, or if you're on your way home, okay? Thanks, Dad. He placed his phone face down on his desk after locking it, and thought back to what Aizawa said. A date? No way, right? Shudo doesn't see me that way, we're just friends. Right? Even if I want us to be so much more, we're just. Midoriya? He looked up to see everyone staring at him. He blinked. Yes. Please stop glowing. Instantly, he shone brighter, and he slapped his hands to his cheeks like he could shove it back into his chest, away from the surface. He wasn't a goddamned glow stick. I'm sorry, he said, shoving his stupid emotion deep into his chest, the glow receding along with it. That happens. His teacher nodded slowly. Just try to keep it together, okay? He nodded, and was the first person out when the bell rang. He heard his classmates stumbling after him, and it made him want to move faster, because he didn't want to share Todoroki with any of the females in his class. They'd sink their claws into him, and he'd never see that pretty eye candy again. Yeah, Namuri gave him a rundown of all of the nicknames that he could use for his crush, and eye candy was his favorite. Namuri had said it was because you loved the way a certain candy tasted, and when you're with that certain person, they're pleasing to the eyes in the way candy is pleasing to the tongue. He loved looking at Todoroki, so he thought the name fit perfectly. Unfortunately, they were right behind him when he exited the building again, and he scanned the parking lot for dual-toned hair. As he stepped forwards, he heard his classmates begin whispering, saying that maybe Midnight was done with him, and she had abandoned him. His ribbons swirled around his arms excitedly, and he instantly took off, hearing his classmates cry out, but he was already out of sight. For some reason, his invisible ribbons were the first things that found Todoroki, and all he had to do was follow their tugging, and he was colliding with a large chest. Whoa! He heard Todoroki laugh, before his arms were wrapping around his waist. Midoriya snuggled into his chest, for once grateful for his 4-inch height difference. Come on, Todoroki said, reluctantly pulling away. We have somewhere to go, remember? Midoriya beamed, Todoroki smiling at the sight, before he reached over to take his backpack, slipping it over his shoulders despite the smaller boy's protests. You make me want to be my best, because you deserve the best, he said, swatting the boy's hands away. Let me dote on you. Shuto, he whined, because this boy does not know what he's doing to Midoriya's newfound emotions. He was so glad that he was able to outrun his classmates, otherwise they would be all over the taller boy. He wanted to flaunt the boy, but at the same time, he wanted to hide him, keep him a secret from everyone. It reminded him of a quote he read in an old book. If a king owned a pearl without price, a gem he cherished above all, would he hide it away, bury it from sight afraid others would take it? Or would he display it proudly, set it in a ring or crown, so that all the world could behold its beauty and see what richness it brings to his life? Standing with this boy, even though he wasn't Midoriya's, he couldn't help but understand it, even if his meaning was far less than what the books had been. If Todoroki was his pretty pearl, would he hide him away from everyone, namely his stupid classmates, or would he hang off of Todoroki's side and walk by his classmates with a smirk? For some reason, he already knew which one he was leaning towards. The boy grinned at him, and Midoriya pouted, but still grabbed onto Todoroki's sweater, a habit he had gotten into because he had never held his mother's hand. "Hey Shuto," he said, and the boy looked over at him. They were nearing one of their favorite coffee shops, the one they first met at. "If you could ask me of anything and I had to say yes, what would you ask? Will you marry me?" Midoriya stumbled and choked, sometimes forgetting that Todoroki could be so blunt, even when joking. He looked up at the boy beside him and met gray and blue eyes. "That would be my question," he whispered, and Midoriya saw himself start to glow in the boy's eyes. Todoroki pressed the button to cross the street and grabbed his hand, looking down at it as he traced mindless patterns across his skin. "Before I met you," he said, grabbing Midoriya's other hand, "I didn't know what it was like to think of someone and smile for no reason. I was so cold, so uncaring, a glacier that had been frozen since the beginning, and you were the sunshine that shone through the storm clouds, showing me that light was always possible." Their timer began beeping, and they crossed Midoriya in a daze, because was Todoroki doing what he thought he was doing? He could feel an emotion he linked to excitement begin curling in his stomach, hope bursting through his very being as he digested what Todoroki was saying. Did he really? "I didn't think about very many things in that state," he admitted, and opened the door to the coffee shop, the smell of caffeine wafting up to them. "I was so focused on my hatred for my father, my hatred for the world, that I couldn't even see in front of me. You showed me that even though you could be suffering, on the verge of ending it all, happiness is possible. It made me happy, and soon my head was always full of you, your smile and laugh, your bouncy step and kind eyes, everything." He took them to their usual secluded corner and sat down, setting the backpack beside him before waving a waiter to start their usuals. "You always occupy my thoughts, taking them for yourself, and it wasn't long before you took my heart. I don't know if 3 months is too short for me to accept these feelings, but to me, it feels like I took forever." Todoroki accepted their drinks with a grateful nod and turned back to the stunned boy. "I've never experienced this before, but if it's with you, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to give you my everything, because I want to be your everything." Todoroki took his hands and looked Midoriya in the eyes. "Izuku, I want you to stop looking because I'm right in front of you." Midoriya couldn't describe the feeling in his chest. It was something like exhilaration on steroids, the butterflies in his stomach having doubled in a split second, making his legs tingle as he smiled, tears welling up and spilling over. He was so happy right now. "Shuto," his voice cracked, but pulled out a coin, and the boy looked a little confused. "Let's flip a coin. If it's heads, you're mine. If it's tails, I'm yours, because all I want is to just be with you." Todoroki's eyes widened, and he dropped his head, hair shadowing his face. "Really?" His voice was choked, as if he was pressing all of his emotions away. Although he couldn't see it, Midoriya nodded, trying to sniff back his tears. "Shuto, a day without you is a day without sunshine. The sun may be bright outside, but I myself cannot shine. You are the reason I smile all day, and I promised myself I would be the one to make you smile." Todoroki looked up, and he smiled. His eyes were wet from tears and his cheeks were red from the confession, but he was smiling. He reached over and grabbed Midoriya's hand, the one holding the coin, and pressed a kiss to his knuckles, before taking the coin. "Let's flip this coin," he said, and he flicked it into the air with his thumb. "Heads," Midoriya called, wiping the tears from his eyes as Todoroki added his own. "Tails never fails." Todoroki caught the coin with hand, but slapped it down against his other hand, flipping the coin over once more before either could see what it had landed on. He lifted his hand, and the coin glinted from Midoriya's glow. It was tails. Todoroki looked up into Midoriya's eyes with an intensity he'd never seen before, a smoldering heat that spoke of a yearning for something he has never had, and it made Midoriya's toes curl. "You're mine," Todoroki breathed, and holy shit, those two words should not sound that good. Midoriya laughed, his skin glowing as his cheeks flushed. He took a sip of his drink, enjoying the sweet flavor, before pinging his head at the way Todoroki stared at it in envy. "What?" he asked, and Todoroki's eyes snapped up to meet his. "Date me, Izuku. Date me, fall in love with me, marry me, and spend the rest of your life with me." Midoriya's jaw dropped, and he stared at the perfect, beautiful boy in front of him. For a split second, he wondered if this was moving too fast. He had known this boy for 3 months. Granted, they were the best 3 months of his life, and he felt himself falling for the boy before he even knew how to fall for someone. He felt his ribbons attach themselves to Todoroki, and marveled the way they swirled around him, caressing him gently, as if yearning to touch him. Then again, what part of his life was normal? He was born in a world where people could move things with their minds, set things on fire with their touch, change into animals, everything. He was born into the world to a lawyer and a villain, automatically dealt one of the words cards in the deck, and he had been quirkless, making him literally quirkless villain trash. It was that world that sent him there, twisted who he was to make them feel superior, suppressing who he was on a lie, telling themselves that it was because he could be a villain, he could kill people just like his father. If that world wanted to say he was moving too fast, tell him that he shouldn't be able to feel what he was currently feeling, then he would stick his middle finger up and say, "F you world. You'll have to woo me, Todoroki Shuto, before I take your last name and become yours." The boy flushed, before he was laughing, tears falling down his cheeks as he pressed his face to Midoriya's hand, peppering kisses against it. "I'll woo Izuku. I'll woo the hell out of you, until you can think of nothing but my name." Todoroki smirked, but his teasing tone went right over Midoriya's head. "I'll be waiting." They spent the rest of their first date catching up on each other's week. Todoroki had been put on a stricter schedule due to Yui's recommendation exam coming up, and he rarely had any time to text Midoriya. "Your web, is it healing well?" Todoroki had paid for the bill like the gentleman he was, and was taking the initiative to walk him home. Midoriya hummed, and pressed a hand to his chest. "Actually, you can't see much of a difference, since it's only been 3 months. Nizu said it usually takes a few years to completely disappear, since my veins have been poisoned my entire life, you know? He did say the bruising would be the first thing to go, and every day I can feel my quirk getting stronger. That's good. I want you to be healthy, that way I can devour you without worry of hurting you." Midoriya blinked, and put that down on the list of things Todoroki said that he needed to ask Namuri about. "Shuto, does this make you my boyfriend?" Todoroki hummed, swinging their hands between them as they walked, nearing Midoriya's apartment. "I think so? Isn't that what people who are dating are?" "I know," Midoriya said, looking down at their linked hands as a happy feeling grew in his chest. "But a lot of the girls said something about talking." Todoroki ped his head to the side, looking into Midoriya's eyes. "Is that not what we were doing before I asked you out?" Midoriya blinked. "Oh, I guess you're right." Todoroki grinned, and nuzzled his face into Midoriya's hair, before they arrived at the complex. Todoroki walked him to his door, and they stood like that, staring into each other's eyes, before Todoroki leaned down and pressed a kiss to Midoriya's forehead, pulling the boy into his arms. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me a chance. Always." He would always be sad to see Todoroki walk away, but another part of him, a part hidden deep in his mind, would always appreciate it. He turned towards the door once Todoroki was out of sight, and pulled his key out of his pocket, unlocking the door and slipping inside. "How was it?" He turned around after locking the door, and pressed his back against it, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, slumped on his side. "How was what?" Yamada asked, turning to see Aizawa grinning at his coffee. "Guess what my son did today?" Yamada looked over at the boy slumped on the ground, then over at Namuri, who looked just as confused. What?" "He had his first date." "What?" Everyone in the room flinched at Yamada's screech, which was amplified by his quirk, and Aizawa glared at him until the man was able to control his voice. Namuri turned bright eyes towards the boy sitting in his own world. It was Todoroki, wasn't it? Why wasn't I informed of this? Yamada cried, crossing his arms and pouting as Aizawa smiled fondly. Aizawa Izuku was even plotting, you hear him? Oh my god! Midoriya squealed, pressing his face to his hands as he squirmed, elation welling in his chest and threatening to explode. His skin was glowing, he could see it through his fingers. Nemuri was suddenly in front of him, her eyes wide with mischief. He what? Give me all the juicy details. Nemi! He said something I don't understand. He pulled the woman close and whispered what Todoroki said, about how he wanted Midoriya to be healthy so he could devour him without any pain. He started whispering these things after Nemuri said some of the things Todoroki implied were not for everyone's ears. Nemuri threw her head back and began howling with laughter. Both men turned and looked over at the woman who was dying, slumping onto her back as she threw a hand over her mouth and rolled over, her body shaking as her silent laughter suffocated her. Oh my god, she panted almost a good 3 minutes later. Every time she seemed like she was calming down, she would pause and go right back into laughing, clutching her side and whining about dying. I'm going to have a 6-pack. Midoriya puffed his cheeks out, and Nemuri cooed at the sight. It wasn't that funny. Oh, my little tater tot, she said fondly, sitting up with much effort as she reached over and ruffled his hair. Has Shota not given you the talk? Shut up, Kiyama. Aizawa said instantly, and Yamada winced in sympathy. What talk? Midoriya asked, looking between all 3 adults with confusion. The talk about SEC and children. Oh, yeah, he said it was between a man and woman for children. The boy nodded as if he just dropped some massive knowledge. So, we've covered that. Yamada shook his head and placed it against the table with a sigh. My poor baby bean. Nemuri grabbed Midoriya's shoulders and hauled him to his feet. Midoriya couldn't really say he liked the way her eyes gleamed. Tater tot, I'll give you the talk, but you can't hate me when I'm done. Midoriya pet his head to the side. Why would I hate you? Goodbye, precious, innocent bean, Yamada ummed. You will be missed. Midoriya shot him a glance, but Aizawa had the same face of acceptance, like something was about to happen, and he had no power to stop it. Come on, tater tot, Nemuri said, guiding him to his room. There is a lot you need to know. Sitting in class the next day, he still got uncomfortable shivers up his spine from remembering what he had learned from Nemuri. That it was a lot. And he did not want to think about it. He was thankful that today was the last day of school, and the thought of seeing Todoroki again was making him glow no matter how many times his teachers told him to cut it out. Todoroki. His boyfriend. Instantly, he had to bite back a squeal as his glow made Bakugou's hair look green, and he dropped his head to his desk as he tried to shove his fire back into his chest. As soon as he was successful, 5 minutes later, he lifted his head and nodded. Along with whatever the teacher was saying, before he felt his phone buzz with Todoroki's signature vibration, and his glow came back with a vengeance. He ignored the way his classmates seemed to sigh, knowing it was a lost cause to try and keep him from using it, and he pulled his phone out to read the message. Hot damn it. I want to see you again. So I'm picking you up. I'll beg your dad if I have to. Izuku plzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzz. Fine, but I'm going to flaunt you like the beautiful eye candy you are. Hot damn it. I like that idea. Let me change into some rich BOI clothes and do my hair. Should it? Hot damn it. Should yes. Ripped jeans. Gelled hair. Jean jacket. Combat boots. And a bad boy smirk. My way. You're going to kill me instead of my classmates. Hot damn it. All's fair in love and war. I'll be there in 10. Don't hurt yourself. Midoriya texted Aizawa again, the man sending him a thumbs up, before he locked his phone and sunk down in his seat with a high-pitched sigh. He didn't know Todoroki owned half of those things, and yet here he was, going to show up at Midoriya's school and pick him up while making everyone swoon. Ugh, he's actually going to kill us all. Goodbye world, you won't be missed. The teacher rambled on, and Midoriya wasn't even paying attention, couldn't bring himself to focus. He was finally getting out of this hellhole, and with a spot already secured in Yui after Nizu saw what he could do, saw he had a heart for heroics, he was in a state of relaxation, knowing he had nothing to worry about until his dad was his homeroom teacher. Don't take him wrong, he wasn't going to slack, he just knew he had already made it into Yui. The bell suddenly rang, and everyone was gathering their things around him, saying their goodbyes and telling each other they would be missed. Midoriya put his things away, nodded at his teacher, and walked out of the classroom, not even bothering to say goodbye to any of the bullies who tormented him. He heard everyone scramble after him, and he rolled his eyes. Were they really that curious to see how he lived his life, now that he was a hero's child? He stepped out of the building and cast his eyes around the lot, before landing on Todoroki leaning against the wall looking like F&G meal. True to his word, he was wearing shades, and his hair was gelled to one side, the white covering the red. His black ripped jeans hugged his fit legs, while his white shirt was slim but not skin-tight, and the jean jacket on top he looked ugh my F-I-N-G heart. He smiled and heard the entire class gasp at the sight of the boy, before the girls started whispering excitedly, giggling behind their hands and daring each other to go talk to him. Todoroki turned and looked in their direction, eliciting a squeal from all of the girls as he pushed himself off of the wall and began gracefully striding their way. What the F dash? He heard one of the guys shriek. Why is he so good-looking? Oh my god, a girl squealed, and Midoriya could imagine her bouncing on her heels. He's coming this way. He's looking at me. He's looking at me. Another girl shrieked and Midoriya chuckled, before he began walking towards his boyfriend. The entire class began shouting at him, telling him to stop taking their chance at a boyfriend, that he would always be too ugly to gain a significant other, one braver girl yelling at him to get away from her boyfriend, before she snatched his arm and yanked him back. Midoriya's anger blew up in his chest, and he whirled around with a hiss, smoke curling from his lips, before he remembered what Nizu had been teaching him, and he took a deep breath, putting his fire back into his chest. He settled for just glaring at her as he shook his arm out of her grasp, but the girl held her ground, putting her hands on her hips to glare at him. Stay away from my boyfriend, Deku, she spat, and turned to Todoroki, a bright, hopeful smile taking place on her face. Todoroki just stared at her, before pinging his head to the side. I'm already dating someone. The girl's jaw dropped, and she stomped her leg with a cry. I can be better than her. I'm a size B cup and I'm a perfect hourglass figure. I'm only going to grow from here. She shrieked, and her friends shouted encouraging words her way. Midoriya felt his chest swell with the fire he was still struggling to hold back, before his backpack was taken off of his back and he was spun around. His vision swirled as he was tossed over a toned shoulder, and he wanted to giggle. If you'll excuse me and my boyfriend, we have other things to attend to. He turned and walked away with Midoriya thrown over his shoulder like a sack of rice, leaving all of his old peers to stare at him in shock. Midoriya pushed himself up against Todoroki's back, and made eye contact with the girl who was trying to take his boyfriend of one day. He winked at her, and blew her a kiss, seeing her face burn a bright red before Todoroki carried him around the corner, away from his old life and into his bright future. What if they won't like me? No one can't not like you. Midoriya was pacing in his bedroom, hands buried in his hair. It was 11 at night and Todoroki was laying on his bed, staring at the ceiling and replying to every one of Midoriya's insecure questions with words of affection and encouragement. He and Todoroki had been going strong for a good 7 months, bringing them up to Yui's new year, and they still haven't kissed. They both agreed that although they had been ready, they had jumped into a relationship pretty quick, and decided to allow themselves to grow together, learn as a couple. His family loved Todoroki, although Nemuri had been suspicious as to why the son of the number 2 hero suddenly took interest in her little tater-tot, but when she had seen how happy they were together, the idea had quickly grown on her. Todoroki helped him discover a lot of things about his quirk, and he was extremely shocked to find that his fire didn't have a whiplash if he used too much, or used it for a long time. It wouldn't die down if it was burning for a while, but it could consume any other fire it touched, making it his own, and his fire didn't burn him. It made him wonder if that was because his fire had been locked up for so long that it wouldn't allow anyone or anything to lock it up again. His fire could create anything, but he had to know how it looked, worked, sounded, and the authenticity was based on his knowledge. For example, he could create a phone, and it would look, way and sound like a phone, but since he didn't know all the inner mechanics and how it works, it wouldn't function like a phone. He also couldn't create any of the other elements. He could create their image, but his fire refused to turn into water or rock. That isigidi, but oh well. When creating people, he couldn't create someone he's never seen before, because they didn't look human-like, and he couldn't create a quirk unless it was used on against him. Todoroki refused to use either of his quirks on his boyfriend, so his flame Todoroki was quirkless. His telekinesis wasn't inanimate, but it wasn't actually alive. He called it his ribbon, even though with his quirk growing every day, it had surpassed the length of a blue whale and was nearing 3, and he could split it as many times as he wanted without it losing strength. It wasn't inanimate, and it wasn't alive, because it was affected by his feelings like most quirks were, but his ribbon could react without him prompting it to, like if it needed to protect him. It was like the eyes in the back of his head, making sure no one would be able to sneak up on him. It had also taken an obsession over Todoroki, and Midoriya would leave the room, only to come back and find the boy floating with his ribbons swirling around him, gently caressing him like a lover. Todoroki tried not to be weirded out, because his boyfriend's quirk was over here running up and down his body, and although it wasn't SXL, it still felt pretty weird. Midoriya had explained that his ribbons react to his emotions sometimes, and his emotions really loved Todoroki, so his ribbons did too. It placated the boy, and Todoroki felt more flattered that his boyfriend liked him so much his quirk was affected by it, than weirded out. He decided to call his quirk Fiery Ribbon, just because it sounded like it wouldn't be that strong, and then he could turn around and be like, psych, it's 2 quirks, one's fire and the other's telekinesis. Gotcha. Endeavor used to cut their time together short by pulling Todoroki away in the middle of their dates, or hangouts, but Midoriya had threatened to call the police on him for child abuse, and even if Endeavor's shitty lawyers could cover it up, his reputation would take a major blow. Midoriya was still planning on doing it, once he found a way to get Todoroki's mother out of the hospital, but for now he would dangle that over the man's head. Yeah, but I'm a villain's child and everyone there is trying to be a hero, and what if they think I'm only there to sabotage them and then? Todoroki was in front of him before he could blink, and his hands were on his cheeks as he pressed his forehead against Midoriya's. Instantly, all the tension melted from his body, and he sighed, putting his own hands over Todoroki's as the boy rocked them side to side. "You're perfect, Izuku," he whispered, and Midoriya closed his eyes. "You're smart and beautiful, and you love making people smile, and you're extremely kind, even if you hold one hell of a grudge." Midoriya chuckled at the reminder, and he felt Todoroki nuzzle closer to him. When they were 3 months into their relationship, Todoroki accidentally ate the last caramel chocolate bar, and Midoriya hadn't even looked at him until the boy had bought him another one, and even then he still brought it up. "You think so?" he asked, and opened his eyes, looking into Todoroki's mismatched but so beautiful eyes. "I know so. And even if they don't like you, they'll have your awesome boyfriend busting down their reputations." Midoriya giggled, and Todoroki smiled at the sound. He leaned in and pressed a kiss against Midoriya's nose, and pulled him into his chest, nuzzling into the smaller boy's neck. Sometimes, Midoriya feels his happiest in Todoroki's arms, like they were his protection from the world, a promise to always be by his side. He found out, not everyone's hug felt like iron bars keeping you from ever leaving. They didn't feel like someone was locking you away from the world, as if you were nothing but a skeleton to be kept in the closet. In Aizawa's hug, he could feel the fatherly affection, even if they were far and few in between, due to the man's reputation of being emotionless. Nemuri's hug felt like what he guessed a mother's hug was supposed to feel, comforting and loving, a calm feeling compared to his mother's iron grip. Yamada's hug was like an overgrown puppy, every single one would have you squish to his chest as he spun you around, which you would think would be Nemuri's hug, but it wasn't. Ida was that one-armed hugger, like you couldn't tell if he didn't want to touch you, or if he was just not a touchy person. Todoroki was his protection, his shield from the world that would hate him for the blood that ran through his veins. Although it was weird that once they found out said blood had been killing him from poison, they were all over him, apologizing for ever thinking he would turn out like his father, and it scared him. Because if they reacted that badly when they found out he was healing from the final stage, How horrible were the children's deaths once they passed the fourth stage? He had been a few months from finding out. Apparently, if a child has had suppressants running through their veins for 10 years, it automatically kills them. Their bodies have been destroyed, and their immune systems were broken, so once they hit 15 years from their first injection, it was instant death. It didn't matter if they were healing, 10 years was a death sentence, and that's why heroes who saved webbed children go through such lengths to make sure they wouldn't be in danger. It was why he was paranoid whenever someone offered him something that he didn't know the ingredients to. Because if it was laced with suppressants, goodbye world. I'm super excited for the new year, Midoriya whispered against his boyfriend's chest, and he felt more than heard the vibrations from his hum. I'll be that much closer to helping people who are like me. You'll make an amazing hero, Izuku, Todoroki whispered, placing a kiss to his head. That was another thing. The emotionless son of Endeavor was super affectionate. He loved hugs and holding hands and cuddling and just feeling. He loved it, and Midoriya wondered if that was what it meant to be touch-starved. As if he himself wasn't. You'll make an amazing sidekick, Midoriya giggled, and Todoroki pulled away with a fake offended gasp. I knew it. He turned his nose to the ceiling. You're only with me so I can be your sidekick. Midoriya wrapped his arms around the boy's torso, fighting a grin. You caught me. Don't leave me though, you'll be an excellent sidekick. I can't believe I fell for your lies, Todoroki sniffed, and turned his head away from Midoriya every time the boy tried to look into his eyes. Aw Shuto, he cooed, pressing a kiss to the boy's collarbone. I'll always lie to you. Like right now, when I say you look amazing. You're so mean. Todoroki cried, falling back into the bed and taking Midoriya with him, before wrapping his limbs around the smaller boy like a koala, and pretending to fall asleep. Shuto, Midoriya whined, uselessly squirming in the taller boy's hold. Don't bed me, I'm too young. Todoroki choked on his spit and pulled away, sitting up as he tried to expel the liquid in his lungs while Midoriya laughed. When he was done coughing, he slumped back onto the bed beside the smug boy. You became way too powerful once Nimuri started educating you on Entirthus, he said, and Midoriya's smirk grew. What happened to my innocent boyfriend? He whined, and Midoriya laughed. He was crushed underneath the Izuku Nemi created. Todoroki groaned and buried his face in his pillow. I can't believe your dad is going to be my homeroom teacher. His voice came out muffled, and Midoriya grinned, placing his hand on the boy's back and began running it up and down, marveling at the muscles. You'll get used to it, he said, and Todoroki playfully sighed. Stop judging me, he muttered, and Midoriya giggled. No, your muscles need to be adored. They are a gift from above. Ha, Todoroki deadpanned, his voice still muffled from the pillow. These are a gift from the geezer's stupid training. Shoo, Midoriya whispered, rolling over to press his face onto Todoroki's back. I don't want to thank your father for giving you an amazing figure, let me just be grateful. He felt Todoroki chuckle underneath him, before the boy rolled over, and Midoriya squawked when he was suddenly bundled into a blanket burrito. Todoroki's phone lit up, and he sighed, slumping face first back into the bed. I'm not answering it. Shuto, Midoriya said, the phone floating into his hands. You know he'll only get more irritated if you ignore him. Todoroki heaved a sigh, and pushed himself to his knees, gently grabbing the phone from Midoriya's grasp. He put the phone to his ear. What? Midoriya laid back down on the bed, crossing his arms under his head and watched the way emotions didn't show on Todoroki's face whenever he was talking to Endeavor. I'm with my boyfriend. Midoriya grinned at that, and a soft smile slipped onto Todoroki's lips as the sight. Endeavor had been set at first, to find out that his perfect creation was broken, and couldn't give him powerful grandkids, so he had immediately disapproved of them. Midoriya had beamed at him, pet his head to the side and said, if your son and I had children, they'd have 4 quirks. Get the F out of my face before I call the cops on you for child abuse. Suddenly, Endeavor approved of their relationship, telling Todoroki that as long as Midoriya was powerful, he could accept him to have the Todoroki name. Fine. I'm leaving. Midoriya looked up at his boyfriend in time to see him slump onto his chest, slotting his legs in between Midoriya's and wrapping his arms around the smaller boy's torso. "I don't want to go," he whined, his voice sounding like a petulant child being dragged away from the toy section in the store. Midoriya began running his fingers through the boy's hair, and he leaned into his hand. "I'll see you tomorrow, so we can prepare for school in 2 days." Todoroki sighed, before pushing himself to his elbows and leaning into Midoriya's space, his eyes smoldering. "I want to kiss you." Midoriya's fire burst up to his skin, and Todoroki laughed when the boy resembled a green glow stick. "I don't even know how to kiss," Midoriya protested, and Todoroki sat back on his heels, shrugging. "If you're not ready, then that's fine," he winked at his glow stick of a boyfriend. "But my lips will always be ready to teach." Midoriya slapped his hands against his cheeks as if he could stop his body from glowing, and Todoroki's velvety laugh caressed his ears. "I gotta go, Izuku, but I'll see you tomorrow." Midoriya sat up and nodded, walking the taller boy to the door. "I'll see you, Shudo." Todoroki smiled and waved goodbye, Midoriya watching his figure disappear, before he turned around and locked the door, making his way to his room and falling back onto his bed, snuggling into the covers that still smelled like his boyfriend. "Everything is going to be okay." Todoroki admits he could have been in a better mood. His father hadn't allowed him to see his boyfriend for a week, because Yui's recommendation exam coming up. Apparently, Nizu guaranteed Izuku's spot in Yui, because he had seen Izuku's will to help people, despite how someone he was supposed to trust had been breaking him. Nizu had seen the way Izuku had mind-blowing control over a quirk he's had for less than a year, and he had been impressed. You know what that meant for Todoroki? No Izuku cuddles for a week. So yes, he could be in a better mood. The exam was pretty simple, especially since he was learning to use his fire, not enough that it would lick off of his skin like Izuku's, but enough to melt the ice that formed on his body. He had snapped at someone for getting in his way, because the exam was done and the boy was blocking the exit. He just wanted to see Izuku. When he realized he snapped, he had walked back to the boy and apologized, telling him he wasn't in a good mood and he hopes the boy could forgive him. The boy had seemed in his own world, so Todoroki had awkwardly walked away, sprinting away from his father calling him until he was off of campus, waving goodbye to Midnight who was on her way to campus. He had sprinted all the way to Izuku's apartment, and as soon as the smaller boy pulled the door open, he promptly passed out in his arms. It was one of his worst moments. He had done the entire recommendation exam, and then he had ran from Yui to Izuku's apartment. That was a lot of running, but he didn't care. He would finally see his small boyfriend after a whole week. When he came to, he was still in his exam clothes, but someone had tossed him into a warm bath. He closed his eyes and leaned back with a groan, his entire body tired from all of his physical strain. He felt the water shift around him, before something curled around his body like a giant hug. He smiled softly, and not even a second later, the door was opened. "You're awake." Todoroki hummed softly and cracked an eye open, meeting his tiny boyfriend drowning in one of Todoroki's missing sweatshirts. "I was looking for that," he informed the boy, who puffed his cheeks out in a pout as he crossed his arms. "Well, it's mine now," he said, and Todoroki chuckled, patting the side of the tub where Izuku took a seat. His legs were covered by dark blue leggings, safe from the biting cold of the tub. "I missed you," Todoroki whispered, and pressed his head against his boyfriend's side. Izuku began gently carding his hair, moving white and red around until it was a mixture of both. "I missed you too," he said back, and Todoroki looked up into his bright green eyes. Sometimes, it is Sikidi, dating Izuku. Just because he was so innocent, and Todoroki's flirting and innuendos went right over his head, leaving him a little disappointed. But at the same time, it was so adorable, the innocence that Izuku held. Even though the boy had knowledge, he didn't understand it, and that left him knowing but not knowing. Todoroki would be the one to corrupt him, show him that there are other pleasures past hugging and cuddling, NTMT pleasures that only lovers knew. Unfortunately, he was only 15, and had vowed that the only person he would take would be his husband, after marriage. If his plans went correctly, Izuku would be his husband, and he could continue showing the boy the world. "Izuku," he whispered, and the boy hummed. "When can I kiss you?" Instantly, Izuku's body lit up, shining a bright green even in the bathroom lighting. Todoroki thought that was adorable. Most people couldn't tell when they flustered their partner, but here he had a glow stick of a boyfriend who only lit up when he was embarrassed. "I don't know how to kiss," Izuku said, and Todoroki couldn't help but shake his head at the weak argument. If Izuku wasn't ready, he wasn't going to force him, but he had been aching to taste the boy ever since he first saw him. He had wondered what it would feel like to kiss someone who also had fire running through his veins. "And I've told you, my lips will always be here for teaching." "Okay." Todoroki faltered. "Okay." Izuku twisted his fingers into Todoroki's jacket. "I've been stalling for a while. I would love to kiss you." His glow was shining through the sweatshirt, and Todoroki sat up on his knees, putting him at Izuku's collarbones. "We don't have to unless you're. I want to kiss you. So, just kiss me." Todoroki felt a fond smile slip onto his lips, and he felt joy spread through his entire being, filling up his body until he could burst. He gently placed his hands on Izuku's face, thumbs running against the small boy's freckles, his fingers brushing against the short, shaved hair of his undercut. He leaned in and pressed his forehead against Izuku's, staring into the boy's eyes to make sure he was okay with it. Izuku's eyes dropped down to his lips, and he slowly leaned in, closing his eyes as they shared a breath, and their lips met in the middle. Someone can kiss in so many ways, and Todoroki was determined to show them all to Izuku, but for now he settled for a light brush, just enough for their lips to disconnect with a light smacking sound. Izuku leaned back and pressed the tips of his fingers, his eyes wide as his first kiss was forever engraved into his memory. And then he was leaning in for another one. His lips were warm, soft and smooth like he was wearing chapstick. Izuku didn't kiss Todoroki back, and Todoroki knew it was just because he didn't know how to. Instead, the boy's hands were buried deep into his hair as he leaned down, his ribbons running up Todoroki's sides and pressing him closer to Izuku, as if the boy could never be close enough. Izuku's kiss was soft, sweet in a way that said he has never kissed before. Todoroki smiled softly, breaking the kiss and hearing Izuku's slight whine. "Move your lips," he whispered against the boy's mouth, and when Izuku complied, Todoroki was on cloud 9. He decided to hell with it as he liked the seam between Izuku's lips, and his mouth went open with a gasp, like he didn't believe Todoroki just did that. He took his chance and licked into the boy's mouth, tasting the achingly sweetness of his tongue, and he knew he was addicted. He knew he would forever live for that taste, would do anything to have it again. Izuku opened his mouth wider and pulled Todoroki's head closer, not knowing what the taller boy was doing but absolutely loving it. Izuku's cheeks were glowing as Todoroki explored his boyfriend's mouth, and Izuku flushed brighter before pulling away, adorably overwhelmed. He was panting, and Todoroki grinned at his boyfriend, nuzzling his way into the smaller boy's shoulder, peppering kisses all over his neck and collarbones, beaming with happiness. "That's a kiss." Izuku sounded out of breath, and Todoroki grinned, pressing another kiss to the junction of Izuku's neck and shoulder. "That's called a French kiss," Todoroki informed the flustered boy, and pulled away to see Izuku hum, pressing his fingers lightly against his tingling lips. "I liked that," he admitted, and Todoroki felt a smug feeling well up in his chest. His boyfriend liked the way he kissed. He leaned in and exhaled hot air against Izuku's mouth, the boy's once diminishing light coming back with a vengeance. "Want me to do it again?" he asked huskily, liking his lips as Izuku squeaked, embarrassed. "Why yeah." Kissing Izuku was like walking on air. No weight of the world holding him down, away from what he really wanted, his beautiful boyfriend Izuku. It crushed down all of his worries and diminished everything he had been insecure about, until he could think of nothing but his innocent boyfriend's lips. He was on cloud 9, and he never planned on crashing back to Earth. Until the door opened. He broke away from his newfound addiction like a child with their hands in the cookie jar, and met the stunned eyes of Namuri Kiyama. They might have been able to play innocent if there wasn't a string of saliva connecting their lips. "Oh, gosh," she said, and Todoroki said goodbye to the world as he was snatched away from his boyfriend and out of the bathroom, clothing dripping wet and dampening the carpet. With the way Todoroki was trailing water, and the way Namuri was dragging him, it would have looked like she murdered him, if the water had been stained red. He had time to think, at least I finally kissed him, before he met the incredulous eyes of Aizawa Shota, and he said goodbye to the world. After Midoriya successfully smuggled Todoroki into the locker rooms to change into their P uniforms, the boy collapsed beside the lockers. "He's going to get me one day." He groaned, and the rest of the boys filed in, giving him weird looks. Todoroki was a little paranoid after Aizawa demonstrated his Halloween costume early, chasing Todoroki around the apartment as Michael Myers. It was amusing to anyone who didn't know Todoroki was 3 seconds away from being 2,000 feet under. We won't get into that bloody, traumatizing story for the sake of Todoroki's pride. "He's not going to kill you," Midoriya huffed, opening one of the lockers to change. "He's a hero, remember?" Todoroki jerked up into a sitting position and pointed at Midoriya. "He's an underground hero, meaning no one will know if he murders someone, right?" Midoriya rolled his eyes and chucked Todoroki's uniform at him. "Get dressed." Todoroki muttered incoherently under his breath, but stood and opened his locker, before starting to undress to change. Midoriya had just hung his uniform top up when someone gasped behind him, and the locker room quieted down. "Dude, what happened to your back?" Midoriya's eyes blew wide open as he whirled around, locking shocked eyes with the electricity user, Kaminari Denki. He dropped his eyes to his chest and met ugly black spiderwebs, surrounded by dark purple bruising. It wasn't black anymore, but it was still ugly. He crossed his arms over his chest and ducked his head down, trying to curl into himself. He had forgotten about them. Living with Aizawa, the man never forced them to show, and when they did, he never made a big deal about it. Aizawa made him forget that he was broken, because he gave Midoriya hope that he could be fixed. Suddenly Ida's little brother was in front of him, a worried look on his face. Midoriya had never met Ida Tenya, but Tensei always spoke about him, always bragging about how much his little brother was working to get into Yui. "You're being webbed," Ida said, and Midoriya cringed when suddenly everyone began confusedly exchanging glances. "Do you require help?" "I'm okay," Midoriya stuttered, trying to cover his chest from the other boys' curious staring. Ida recognized this and reached over, grabbing his P-top and handing it to him. "He gotten help, and I'm actually healing." Ida nodded, pressing his glasses back up his nose. "Good. If you desire assistance in anything, I will be glad to help." Midoriya nodded. "Thank you." The other boy nodded back, before turning on his heel and making his way back to his locker. "That's absolutely hideous." Midoriya flinched and turned to meet the eyes of a short boy with purple. His eyes were judgmental as he stared at the corners of the purple sliding up Midoriya's shoulders. "How are you supposed to get a girl if you—" Suddenly, Todoroki was in front of the boy, towering over him while steam rose off his body. "You better shut your mouth," he hissed angrily, and the boy flinched at his tone. "Before I hook your organs out with a fishing pole and strangle you with them." "Shuto," Midoriya whispered, gently pulling the steaming boy away from the shaking short boy. "It's okay. Change before you're late." Todoroki didn't stop steaming as he changed, and he glared at anyone who looked their way. When he had finished, he gently grabbed Midoriya's arm and tugged him out of the locker room, muttering threats. They were one of the first people out, and Aizawa instantly turned towards them, before seeing the steam curling off of Todoroki's and the way Midoriya was staring at the floor, before he realized what he did. He had sent his son, who was healing from a poison in his body, to change with a bunch of judgmental teenagers. Midoriya had told him how self-conscious he was of his scarring, and it was in the medical books that kids hated their webs. His face tried to twist in regret, but he wouldn't allow it. He would profusely apologize later, and bribe the boy with whatever he wants to not tell Namuri, because heaven knows what she'd do to him. Todoroki wrapped a gentle arm around Midoriya, and they waited for the rest of the students to finish dressing. When everyone was standing in a loose circle, Aizawa told them they were going to be doing a quirk apprehension test, and ignored everyone's questions and said they would be allowed to use their quirks. "This is going to be fun." Midoriya inwardly shriveled up, wishing there was something to bash his head in with as his dad's face twisted into his maniacal, sleep-deprived grin. "Fun, huh?" Then, Last place gets expelled. Again, he ignored everyone's complaints and started everyone on the 50-meter dash. Midoriya had been wondering just how fast his ribbons could move him, or if he was faster if he just blasted himself forwards with his fire. As he was lining up for his turn, he saw Bakugou holding his hands out, ready to blast himself forwards, and he instantly decided against it. But what was stopping him from using both? He bared his teeth at Bakugou when the boy turned to glare his way, and Bakugou flinched back, eyes wide like he forgot Midoriya now had the emotions that let him fight back. Go! He had wrapped his ribbons around himself and had them coil up, ready to spring forwards in an instant's notice, and as soon as the little robot gave the go signal, he let them explode, where he was past the little robot in a blink of an eye, skidding his feet along the ground to stop himself. 0.16 seconds. He stumbled as he righted himself, staring at the bot in shock. He went how what? He made his way back to Todoroki's side with a dazed expression, before the boy nudged him and pointed to the end of the lane. Midoriya felt his cheeks glow as he took notice of the 2 tracks of green flames, as if he had been moving so fast it had started a fire. He didn't mean for he fire to come out like that, but it looked badass, so he wasn't complaining. He reached his hand out, and the fire rose up into the air, gaining everyone's exclamations of shock, before it swirled over to him, spinning around his arms before sinking into his chest with a soft glow. Everyone was staring at him when he looked up, and his cheeks shone brighter, before Aizawa called up the next people. He ended up placing first, with Ida Tenya right behind him. Before he could worry about hard feelings, the boy clapped him on the shoulder and said he was glad Midoriya was healing. Next was the grip strength, which Midoriya knew he was going to fail, because honestly he was still getting used to the seemingly endless amount of energy his body had, and he didn't really know how to control it. One of the boys, the one with multiple arms, used all of his hands and got a grip strength of 540.0 kilograms, making everyone gather around him, exclaiming in shock and awe, asking him if he was a gorilla or an octopus. Midoriya thought, we can use our quirks. Forgot about that. He looked back down at the tiny device in his hands and pulled one of his ribbons from his arm, curling it around the device before squeezing tightly. He never wants to hear the sound of metal crunching, springs squealing as the device broke, and he dropped the crushed Ken-looking device onto the floor with shock. The boys were silent as he looked up with wide eyes, and only one boy spoke up. That's so manly. Midoriya placed first with a score of 18,143.69 kilograms. Let's say he more than intimidated his classmates, and he wondered just how freaking strong his quirk was, because this sure as hell wasn't his body. The standing long jump was something he only used his fire for, and he got many of his classmates whispering, because Midoriya had 2 quirks? Nobody's complaining about you having 2 quirks, Midoriya whined to Todoroki as they were moving to the side steps, and the boy ruffled his hair with a small smile. That's because I'm not so flashy when I use mine. You're all out there, look at me, my fire and telekinesis. Midoriya kicked him in the shin, and the boy went down with a loud curse. Midoriya was a little shocked at the JRK from the locker room, because with his quirk on the side step, that was practically freaking cheating. Still, he didn't say anything about it, and completed his turn without much fanfare. He tried using his quirk to bounce him from side to side, but it ended up spinning him like a tornado and he had to stop halfway through to collapse in dizziness. On the ball throw, Aizawa had Bakugou demonstrate about where their quirks should be in terms of strength, and the boy launched the ball into the air with a die. Midoriya was not impressed. The students would have been impressed at the 705.2 meters if Midoriya hadn't been getting such bizarre numbers on the other tests, and he could hear them whispering guesses on how big his number would be. He stepped into the circle with his mind whirling. His ribbons combined were about the length of 3.5 blue whales, which roughly put him at about 287 meters, which wouldn't even brush Bakugou's 500. How much force would be added if he made his fire explode? Making a fire Bakugou would only put him at 500, and then that was just too complicated. He would coil his ribbons to fling the ball while also using his flames to boost the distance. Whenever you're ready. Midoriya put himself into a pitcher's position and called the fire from his chest, forcing the pale green flames to curl around his arm and form a small circle around the ball. He could feel his flames tighten together, and he knew he had total control over the ball. His arms shone blue as his ribbons came to life, unbeknownst to him, and the students tittered in confusion. He could glow green and blue? He flung the ball out of his hand, his ribbons exploding outwards and his flames bursting out with a speed that sent him flying backwards, skidding to a stop flat on his back. He coughed as he sat up and tried locating the ball, but he couldn't even see it anymore. He slowly pulled himself to his feet as one of his ribbons curled around him, waiting for its partner to come back. Midoriya was mortified, because 3 whole minutes later, and he still hadn't heard a beeping from the device, so that meant the ball still hadn't touched the ground. His neck began glowing a bright green as the glow sunk from his cheeks and down his body, shining through his clothes as he covered his face in vain, trying to make it stop. The device finally beeped, and he looked up, his glow fading as he and everyone else stared at Aizawa as the man's eyebrows went up. 38,624,256.09 meters. It was completely silent as Midoriya sighed in a breath and ducked his head down, shuffling back to Todoroki's shocked side as the girl who could create anything gasped. "You almost threw that ball all the way around the world." Instantly, he lit up like a glow stick, and Todoroki snapped out of his stunned stupor to slowly ruffle his hair, like he couldn't wrap his head around it. "How the hell are you so powerful?" Midoriya flinched, whirling around to meet livid red eyes, and he felt his old self try and come out, make him meek and unable to look Bakugou in the eyes. He tried to squash that old him down, but old habits die hard. He dropped his eyes to the floor, instantly feeling angry at himself. Just a while ago you were even dying from some stupid but made-up illness, a villain's web or some sheet, and now you're almighty and invincible? Bakugou spat, palms crackling, before the creation girl gasped loudly, drawing the attention to herself as she pressed her hands to her mouth in horror. "You were webbed? Oh my god. Have you gotten help?" Midoriya shuffled uneasily and cleared his throat. "I've been healing for more than half a year, thank you for asking. I'm okay now. If you ever need any help." "Why the F are all of you playing along with this stupid sheet?" Bakugou yelled, and the girl flinched back. Incredulous, Ida, sharing the same look as Todoroki, started steaming in anger. Everyone else was looking back and forwards between the two in stunned, confused, and slightly worried silence. He's obviously lying, just to put his own offended mother in jail for a stupid made-up FA illness. He's a shitty but fake. Why do you FNG extras? Bakugou's quirk suddenly disappeared in his hands as Aizawa's capture weapon wrapped around his mouth. "That's enough, Bakugou." He released the boy, who whirled around with an incredulous look. "Why?" "Bakugou, every teacher on this campus knows where you're supposed to be." Bakugou flinched back at the reminder that he should be in jail. "If you don't mind your words, you'll have a one-way ticket back." Bakugou simmered in silence, shaking with clenched hands, but he kept his mouth shut as Aizawa continued the ball throw. Midoriya's score was completely thrown out of the park by a girl who got an infinity. "Infinity? Wow," Midoriya said, bouncing on his heels excitedly. "That's so cool. Can you imagine? You're not upset?" He turned to meet the invisible girl's uniform, and her question caught a few others' attention. "That she beat you?" Midoriya shook his head. "Why would I be upset? Infinity is a badass number to get. I'm excited for her." He couldn't see the girl's reaction, because he couldn't see her face, but he turned around to watch the rest of the ball throw. The distance running wasn't bad, he kind of just sat on his ribbons as they carried him around the track, in the same way Todoroki was gliding on the ice. He closed his eyes and just floated, ignoring the world until it was just him, Todoroki, and the creation girl, trying to see who'd get out. First, Todoroki was out first, and Midoriya glided beside creation girl, chatting with her until her tank ran out of gas and she was out next. Midoriya got first in that one. The last 2 tests made him want to curl up into a ball and forget everything. He did less than decent in the toe touch, something he knew his dad would fix in an instant, because his status as an underground hero said he needed to be flexible. He tried using his quirk on the sit-ups, let his ribbons just push him up, but Aizawa called him out and said only he couldn't use his quirk. That backstabber. He got second to last on that one, directly after the purple ball boy, and he just laid there as his stomach ached. He rolled onto his side and began teasing Todoroki with jokes and random facts to make him laugh and fail. After the 12th terrible knock-knock joke, Todoroki began chortling, and his sit-ups slowed, but Aizawa said Midoriya needed to leave before he's docked points for distracting others. He pouted, but got up and left his pretty eye candy to get first place on the sit-ups. Midoriya got first place, Creation Girl, Yaoyorozu, got second, and Todoroki got third. It followed with Bakugou, Tokoyami, Shoji, Ajuru, Kirishima, Ashido, Uraraka, Kuda, Satu, Azui, Aoyama, Siro, Kaminari, Jairu, Mineta, and Hagakure. Except, his name wasn't Midoriya Izuku, it was Aizawa Izuku. Written on the scoreboard was the homeroom teacher's last name in front of his. You're his kid. His cheeks lit up as everyone turned towards him, staring between him and Aizawa. With his wavy, dark hair, they said they could see a resemblance, and he stared at his smirking dad with dead eyes. Ida's hand suddenly went up. Are you not worried that some students would think you're giving your son special treatment instead of working him hard like everyone else? Aizawa sighed through his nose and crossed his arms. Because he is my son, I will be judging him harsher than all of you, because I know his limits and strengths. Ida dropped his hand back to his side and bowed at a 90-degree angle. I apologize for my rude question. Aizawa waved him off, and the students went back to looking for their names on the list. Midoriya heard the invisible girl's breath hitch, and he instantly sent a ribbon to wrap around Aizawa's wrist warningly. He better not expel her just because her quirk wasn't physical. If Aizawa participated in the same test at their age, he would have gotten near the bottom too. Oh, and no one's expelled. It was a logical ruse. Midoriya breathed out a sigh of relief and curled his ribbon around Aizawa's chest as a thank you, and the man had to fight his smile away. Everyone began clamoring, shocked that he had fooled him, and Yaoyorozu said it was obvious he only said that to being out everyone's best. Except, Midoriya knew that if Mineta was placed last, Aizawa would have expelled him in an instant. The only reason he didn't was because if Aizawa expelled Mineta for being rude to his son, then the students would automatically think Izuku was getting special treatment, and that was not what was happening. Class dismissed. It was amusing to Izuku, as everyone trudged back to the locker rooms on dead feet, while all he felt was a little bit of quirk exhaustion. He would definitely need to work on making his body stronger, because if someone had the ability to render his quirk useless, he would be useless. That's what he had all these heroes in his life for, to help him build up his strength and make him a hero, a strong hero that will help all of those kids who were webbed just like him. This is the beginning of Aizawa Izuku's path to becoming a hero. The door slammed shut and Izuku sighed heavily. Why won't you let him in? Because, Aizawa said, plopping down on the couch and grabbing the remote to change the channel. Who knows what you two will do behind closed doors? Dad, he said warningly, and Aizawa heaved a sigh of defeat. Fine. He waved his hand towards the door. Let him in. Izuku's ribbon sprang from his arms as he skipped to the door, the invisible lines opening it before he could even get there. Todoroki was standing outside with a sheepish look, rubbing the back of his neck as Izuku's ribbons swirled around him and tugged him inside. Thank you, he whispered to Izuku, and the smaller boy beamed, wrapping his ribbons around Todoroki's chest while the boy knelt down to untie his shoes. Once he was in his slippers, he had his own pair at the Aizawa household. Izuku was tugging him along to his room, before Aizawa yelled, "Leave your door open. Prepare to be scarred for life." Izuku sang back, and Aizawa made a choking noise. Shut you door, don't lock it. Izuku giggled and closed the door, turning and squeaking when Todoroki instantly pressed him against the wall, arms caging him in from each side. You have no idea how much self-control I used today, Todoroki whispered, leaning closer until they were sharing one breath. You drive me insane. You're just going to have to show me, Izuku whispered back, dragging his hands down Todoroki's toned chest as his ribbons did the same thing on his back. He could make people feel his ribbons if he wanted to, but so far only Aizawa, Nemuri, Yamada, and Todoroki have felt them. They said it feels like cold silk running across their skin, and Izuku agrees. If I show you, Todoroki said, pressing a kiss behind Izuku's ear and sending goosebumps running down his shoulder and arm. We'll get a ton of complaints for sound. Izuku's skin lit up bright green at the image his brain supplied to him, and he muffled a squeak into Todoroki's shoulder as the boy peppered kisses up and down his neck. You're so sensitive, Todoroki breathed, exhaling hot air down Midoriya's shoulders and watching the goosebumps raise as the boy shivered under him. I can't wait to find where your sound becomes the loudest. Shuto, Izuku whispered, an admonishment. You can't do that. Oh, I will, Todoroki said, leaning back to look into Izuku's green eyes. After you take my last name and fully become mine. Izuku shone brighter than the sun as he hid his face in his boyfriend's chest, the boy's chuckles vibrating against his face. He hated that he glowed every time he was embarrassed, hated that he wouldn't be able to hide it like others could when the flushed like a normal person. If you're gonna tease me, you can't kiss me. He squeaked when Todoroki's hands were suddenly on his thighs, using them as leverage to hoist Izuku up the wall and hold him there firmly. Izuku's legs instinctively wrapped around his waist, and his arms went around the taller boy's neck. Todoroki smirked when Izuku looked down at their position and cried out, covering his face with his hands as he acted like a light bulb. Ah, Todoroki cooed, leaning closer to Izuku's glowing face. What's wrong? He pressed a kiss against Izuku's hand, eliciting another squeak from the boy. A sudden soft thud came from behind the door. You two better not be doing what I think you're doing. Aizawa yelled, and Izuku slid from Todoroki's grasp, flinging the door open as he snatched the pillow laying against the wall. Izuku's glow had gone down, but it was still there, like a faint blush, and he ran into the living room, chucking the pillow at the unsuspecting parent, who got nailed across the head and fell onto the couch without complaint. An early death, Aizawa said, closing his eyes. I'm ready. Nah, Izuku said sassily. I'll just burn your coffee. Aizawa's eyes flung open as he jerked off the couch, chasing his son into the kitchen, where the coffee bag danced out of his grip. In your stupid quirk, he hissed as Izuku crossed his legs, sitting peacefully on his invisible ribbon floating him above the table, the coffee bag innocently held in his hand. Izuku's hand lit up with green flames, and Aizawa cursed loudly, while Todoroki watched this entire scene with wide eyes. I'll buy you Katsudon. Izuku narrowed his eyes. Foolish mortal. I cannot be so easily swayed with. From that expensive place at the mall. The coffee bag was safely transported to Aizawa's waiting hand. Before Todoroki could comprehend what was even happening, his and Aizawa's phone went off at the same time. Todoroki sighed, knowing it was from his father before he even pulled it out. I gotta go, he said when Aizawa pulled out his phone. Aizawa nodded goodbye as Izuku walked him to the door. I'll see you tomorrow, Izuku said, before standing on his tiptoes to press a kiss to Todoroki's lips. Bye-bye. He closed the door on a playfully indignant boyfriend and skipped his way back to the kitchen, where Aizawa was hanging up the phone with wide eyes. What? Izuku asked. What is it? Aizawa turned to him, blinking rapidly. Hisashi adopted a boy. Shinso Hitoshi would count his blessed stars that present Mike was doing a patrol when his father finally lost it. He and his father had a complicated relationship. He wasn't abusive, and he wasn't neglecting him, at least Shinso didn't think so. He just didn't want anything to do with him. He clothed him, fed him, but they were strangers living in the same house. Shinso was Shinso and his father was whatever his last name was. Shinso got his mother's last name. They ate at different times, and any time Shinso wanted to get a snack, he would have to tell him, and he'd write it down on a notepad to keep track of what he owed him. He said it was something all children did for their parents, as a way of responsibility, and Shinso never questioned him. Questioning his father was something that he learned to never do, because if it was wrong, he would see that and stop. Like when Shinsu first manifested his quirk, his father had told him they were going to try to put him on a medicine that would change his quirk. He was excited, because he didn't want a quirk that reminded his father of his mother. His father had pulled out a needle, and Shinsu's quirk was suppressed for 3 weeks before his body couldn't handle the substance, and he got sick. Shinso would cough it up every time his father gave it to him, bruises formed on his face, and he would cry blood. Even though his father hated Shinsu's quirk, he didn't hate his child, and he stopped injected him. Every time he accidentally used it, they drifted further and further apart, as he only saw the villain he drunkenly had a night with, and was left with the child. He didn't hate Shinso, and that's why he still had a roof over his head, because a small part of him knew he wasn't his mother. Shinso didn't know what made him snap. It was probably because he had actually looked Shinso in the eyes for the first time since he was almost 7, and his eyes had dilated, fear etching into his face as he stumbled back. "Why are you here?" he had whispered, and Shinso had warily stepped back, because even if he didn't like him, he never spoke like that. "I'm your—" "No, you're not," he had screamed, before grabbing the pair of scissors he was using to make his quilt, and Shinso had paled. His father's quirk, control, wasn't like telekinesis, where he could control anything he wanted. He had to hold the object for 10 seconds straight and it would glow a dull blue. His quirk didn't work on living beings. His mother's quirk was called Obey, something he learned when the pro-hero Eraserhead took her down, which allowed her to touch you for a split second, and you had to obey whatever she told you to do. Shinsu's was a combination of the two, although touching people and controlling them gave him a headache, so he opted to just asking questions. As soon as the scissors started glowing blue, he had fallen backwards as his father threw them, because holy effing shit, his dad was trying to kill him. How the hell is he supposed to comprehend this? What the F? He had dashed towards the door, throwing himself at it with all his strength, and had succeeded in busting it down. He had fallen out of the house with a loud cry as the scissors embedded itself into his thigh, sending tears straight into his eyes. The burning pain he had felt was like nothing the movies had played it off to be, where the main character could pull the scissors out with little effort and be okay. He wanted to curl around his leg and scream, because scissors shouldn't burn, they shouldn't feel like those horrible suppressants that felt like fire being injected into his veins. "Stay away!" He jerked to his feet despite the burning hot pain racing up his hip, and stumbled away, crashing down the stairs and letting out a scream as the scissors ripped through his thigh and left a giant, bloody cut that made his head spin. He jerked away as the scissors lifted into the air, but before he could worry about his head being its next target, someone snatched them out of the air, and the blue tinge instantly went away. He sobbed and curled around his bleeding leg, pressing a hand against it as the realization kicked in. His father tried to kill him. He tried to stab him to death with scissors. Shinso thought his father didn't hate him, but it appears as though he was wrong. "Hey, little listener. I called the cops and an ambulance. The man is subdued. Do you think you can tell me what happened?" Shinso prided himself in his ability to hold his emotions back, but with present Mike standing beside him, his walls busted down as he sobbed, telling the man everything about his quirk being suppressed, how his father wanted nothing to do with him, how he snapped after looking him in the eyes for the first time, how he tried to stab him to death with scissors. "Okay, little listener. The ambulance is almost here. Do you have another guardian? A relative that can maybe take you in?" Present Mike had taken off his leather jacket and wrapped it around Shinsu's leg, stopping the bleeding but not the throbbing, burning pain he felt. Shinso sniffed and shook his head. "They all think I'm like my mother." Present Mike hummed. "Which villain is your mother?" Shinso looked up at him with shocked eyes, and Present Mike gave him a sad smile. "What you went through when you were younger is called villain webbing. It's extremely illegal and unfortunately very common amongst villain children. My best friend adopted a boy who had been webbed since he was 4 to 14. Shinsu's eyes went wide. Someone went through the same thing he did, and they were still alive? "Are you sure you don't have any relatives? You're in Yui, right?" "I'm sure," Shinso whispered, his head starting to spin. "They would never take me in, and I'm in general education. My quirk didn't work on the robots." Present Mike hissed. "I knew they needed to change that." He looked back to Shinso. "Are you going to tell me who your mother is, so we can file a report?" "That she's Siren." Present Mike nodded his head, before the ambulance pulled around the corner, and Shinso was quickly loaded into the vehicle, where they laid him down and began asking questions. Except, Shinso was comfortable on the blue bed, it was soft and warm, and he had been feeling dizzy from the pain in his thigh, so when he closed his eyes, he was out like a light.